there's going to be chaos. Like the very paradigm is shifting. The very primitives of the old civilization versus new civilization are going to shift.
We've all heard the saying, money is the root of all evil. We've also heard the revised version, the love of money is the root of all evil. Regardless of the truth of either of these statements, we all acknowledge that money and evil are somehow linked. Money has the power to guide men towards evil behavior. On the surface, this isn't much of a realization. Money leads to evil? Tell me something I don't know, Will. But if we look a little deeper, we might find an important question given the increasing centralization of our globalizing world. What if the mere existence of money itself, regardless of the quantity, can be used to drive men to evil behavior? What if the money can be manipulated before your very eyes, like magic, to bias you to do evil with it instead of good? What would that do to the world? Here's a riddle. Let's say I put a $100 bill in your hands, and that we agreed to stand there for a while and stare at it until something important about it changed. What would change first? I'll speed this up a bit and give you the answer. The material characteristics of the money wouldn't change, not its size, weight, or color, but the immaterial characteristics of it would change, namely its value. With the power of inflation, we wouldn't have to stand there very long until the purchasing power of that $100 bill became much less. But how does that drive men to evil behavior? Well, if the money is worth more today than it will be tomorrow, what are you more likely to do? Spend it or save it? If you can use it to buy $100 worth of something today versus $99 worth of something tomorrow, you're more likely to spend it. And since money is an expression of freedom of choice, the manipulation of money in this way guides your choices to think more about the present instead of building towards the future. The ramifications of present versus future-based thinking are far too vast for me to get into in one monologue, but they're so significant. Jordan Peterson did an entire Bible series lecture about it regarding Cain and Abel, which I'll link to in the show notes. But this is how, without doing anything at all, the nature of the money itself can be used to bias men towards a satisfaction of their present impulses versus considering the future. And this in turn biases men towards evil actions because how many of our most evil deeds were done out of impulse versus long-term planning? In fact, I'd reckon that many of our most sinful actions were based on impulse. I know mine are. So if our money can be manipulated to make us not think about the future, then maybe something in money really is the root of all evil. And Bitcoin fixes this. Which brings me to my guest this week. His name is Aleks Svetski, and he's an entrepreneur, podcast host, publisher, and the author of the new book, The UnCommunist Manifesto. He's become popular and well-known in the Bitcoin space for his outspoken, direct, and aggressive defense of the Bitcoin community. In other words, a so-called toxic maximalist, which makes him my kind of guy. Because he understands how important Bitcoin is, not just from a global finance perspective or from a technological perspective or even from a sovereignty perspective, but from a moral perspective in terms of the lives and choices of the individual men who hold or hodl it. And his new book, The UnCommunist Manifesto, is a rallying war cry for those men and women to build a society on the back of a currency that is not only resistant to the manipulation of us towards evil, but that cultivates us towards the good. Yes, number go up is good, but responsibility go up is better. And communism go down might be the best. In our conversation, Aleks and I discussed his hard-knock upbringing and Steve Jobs' moment, how Bitcoin is both an attractor and accelerant for personal growth, time preference and morality, how savings is the cornerstone of civilization, Bitcoin's new RGU technology, Bushido or the Way of the Warrior, and of course his new book, The UnCommunist Manifesto. This conversation is a great companion piece to my episode with Laser Hodl, Reset, and the Renaissance, which you can find linked in the show notes. But both these chats are not designed for Bitcoin newbies. For those among you who haven't yet ramped up on Bitcoin, I recommend my podcast with Carlos Fenman, the Bitcoin coach, which is also in the show notes. I also strongly recommend his 6-week Bitcoin coaching, which was my orange pill and led me here today. You need to understand the basics before you can develop an effective personal Bitcoin strategy, and his course is the fastest way to get the basics down. Bitcoin's value will start going up again. It's inevitable, so I'd train with Carlos now before you miss this current sale. Check the link in the description to find out more how the Bitcoin Coach can help. This episode is sponsored by my 12-week Men's Renaissance coaching. There is more in you, and I want to help you discover it for yourself, for your community, for your family, and for the glory of God who made you. I'm offering a new promotion. If your outlook on life as a man isn't profoundly changed in 2 conversations, you get your money back. Keep listening to find out more, or email info@renofmen.com to schedule a free 30-minute consultation. And if you enjoy the Renaissance of Men podcast, thank you. Please leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts and a rating on Spotify. And if you're watching this video on YouTube, hit the like and subscribe buttons now. You can also follow me on Instagram and Twitter @renofmen, or subscribe to my mailing list by visiting my website at renofmen.com/newsletter. A quick note before we begin. Alex was moving house before we recorded this podcast, and things didn't go exactly as planned. As YouTube viewers will see, Alex had to do the podcast from inside the walk-in closet at his new apartment. It had been a bit of a long day, but we decided to go ahead with the conversation to make sure my listeners heard it in time for the release of the UnCommunist Manifesto, so you can be part of the fun. When you listen to this podcast, the book should be available for public sale. There's a link at the top of the show notes, so I'd like to ask that everyone listening head over to Amazon right now, pick it up, read it, and if you feel called, leave a 5-star review so we can help get this important work into more hands. Because as I think you'll see, as urgent as the financial case for Bitcoin is, the moral case is just as urgent, if not more. What if we stopped saying, money is the root of all evil? What if we could say in our hearts, money made us good? That's the case that Alex makes, so I hope you'll hear him out. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce this week's guest on the Renaissance of Men podcast, the author of the UnCommunist Manifesto, Aleks Svetski. Aleks Svetski, thanks so much for joining me on the podcast.
Mr. Will, thank you for having me on.
I always love talking to Bitcoin guys because the subject matter goes literally everywhere. But I always like to start out with men's individual journey to Bitcoin, because I think it's always really informative for people who are listening, who are pre-coiners, who are exploring the ideas. Like, what was it that really helped you get to the point that you're at right now? And we'll discuss what that is later with your book and some of the other things that you talk about.
Yeah, so I guess to clarify the question, where I am today with respect to Bitcoin, or just more broadly my viewpoint on life?
Oh, that's a great clarification. Let's start with Bitcoin, and because then it branches out from there.
Yeah, cool. So I think for me there was a couple things. Since I was a younger kid, my parents went through a really rough breakup, and there was this whole custody crap. Like, we went between my mom, my dad multiple times, and I had what I would call a masculine father, in the sense that he had presence, but he was kind of like a tyrannical masculine, kind of like a boy in a sense, where he'd lash out, beat the shit out of my mom, and all this sort of stuff. So it kind of had it's all good. It had like an effect on me and my brother in an interesting way, and growing up in my teens, I was kind of both a troublemaker, but also a goody two shoes. And I was naturally really academically intelligent, but I was also street smart, because I had to get street smart. When my parents split up, I ended up with my dad. My brother and sister went with my mom, so I had to kind of like find my way and basically manage not to get my ass kicked by him, and kind of had to learn to speak and all this sort of shit. And anyway, I ended up leaving his place, obviously, went to go take care of my grandmother, and a lot of responsibility sort of fell on my shoulders, because she was dying from fucking 10 different diseases, and there was no one there to look after her.
Wow, okay.
So I'm this 16-year-old kid I was in high school in this weird, kind of like really posh area where she lived, but I was kind of like this outsider bad boy, kind of almost, if you ever watched that stupid show, The OC, like that kid who comes in and he was the rough one, came into this rich area. That's what I was like. I was this kind of got suspended on my first week of school and this and that. So I kind of like donned all these different things. But by the time I was 18, 19, I had moved out of home and had basically taken my scholarship money from university, and now looking back on it, I can say it. But back then I thought I was being smart. But I basically gambled my scholarship money on the stock market. Thought I was a genius. Within 6 or 8 months, I'd turned like $5,000 into $50,000. You know, I thought I was king shit, and I kind of did some extrapolatory mathematics. I was like, if I continue on this trajectory, I'll be a millionaire by the time I'm 20. And kind of the pre-2008 tremors kicked in, 2007, wiped me the fuck out. I ended up then levering up, margin call after margin call. Anyway, by the time my plan was to be a millionaire by the time I was 20. By the time I was 20, I was actually $250,000 in debt. So I had the car in reverse.
Didn't work out that way. Didn't quite.
You know, wrong way.
Yeah, exactly.
So I took the left instead of a right.
Yeah, exactly.
So that kind of put me on an entrepreneurial path. Like the only way I could eat was I had to pay the banks $1,500 a week before I could even eat. So I did the only thing I could find on short notice was I went door knocking. I went door-to-door sales, selling fucking pay television. And mind you, I didn't have a TV. I lived on someone's fucking lounge room floor. I would get up in the morning, I'd train at the gym, I'd go knock on doors all day. I'd come home and then I'd study the markets and I'd read and try and figure out how did I go so wrong. And my life just went on all these different trajectories. And basically most of my life turned out to be entrepreneurial and driven by a necessity to find a way around red tape and to kind of like there was a period of my life where I think the strongest male presence in my life was my uncle. He was a historian he was with some revolutionary party in the Balkans at one point, you know, doing all sorts of crazy stuff. And he used to teach me, you know, things about women and stuff like that. It's like, you know, there's the 4 F's: find them, fuck them, forget them, or something like that, you know, like all this sort of stuff. So, you know, he you know, was a framed man. I know, right? But
framed
he was
man.
Framed. Like he knew how to like attract women, right?
Yes.
And the thing is, like, I was, you know, shocked by this stuff, but he was an interesting influence in my life. But between sort of that influence, between, you know, the entrepreneurialism, between me, you know, trying to find a way, and the reason I mentioned him was he taught me a lot about Alexander the Great. And there was one thing about Alexander the Great that was interesting was he would always get to the fucking point. So there's the Gordian knot story, obviously, where, you know, he went to the city and they were like, he who can untie this knot before the sun sets runs the thing. So, you know, and there'd be hundreds of people for hundreds of years didn't figure out how to do it. So he looked at the sun, looked at the knot, pulled out his sword and chopped the fucking thing open, right? Or the same thing when the Macedonians first went to fight the Persians. His whole thing is like he broke rank, grabbed a couple of the generals, and they went straight for Darius. There was no fucking around and messing around fighting, and that's how like an army of 35,000 beat an army supposedly 5 to 10 times their size. Went straight to the point. So me, I was always looking at ways to cut through the fucking red tape, cut through the mess and get to the point. So anyway, this is a long way of kind of saying that I was always entrepreneurial. I always had to bear the responsibility of my own existence, my own bills, my own everything on myself. And when I first discovered Bitcoin, I discovered it through basically it was my second touch point. My first touch point, I was a gold silver guy in 2010, 2011. I made a bunch of money out of that. But I kind of forgot about Bitcoin and all that shit because my life went on this whole software development type of space. I was building apps and all this other crap. And when Bitcoin hit me again was in 2015, where this junkie friend of my brother's was talking about Bitcoin, and he's, you know, talking about how he was buying drugs on the dark net or whatever. And I was like,
oh, wow,
that thing is still around? And he's like, yeah, man, you know, my friend made millions of dollars out of it and all this shit. And I was like, what the fuck? And I remember I'd heard of it along the lines, right? Like, I don't know if it was Max Kaiser jumping up and down on a couch, you know, during my gold and silver days or something. So as I started digging, I found this thing that was, you know, anti-fiat because I had a little bit of, Austrian economic sort of
Mm-hmm.
rooting.
Mm-hmm.
It was anti-state, anti-authoritarian government, outside of the control. Like, I found it really interesting that people were making payments online to buy things, and someone wasn't able to stop them, censor them, or something. I was like, fuck, that is pretty damn interesting. So,
Mm-hmm.
as I dug and dug and dug, I had a relatively significant event in 2016 where one of the companies that I'd founded, I'd got pushed out of it by the board because we had a disagreement on how to operate the business, and I was kind of at this. I had my what I call my Steve Jobs moment, right? And I had this identity crisis. I'm like, what the fuck am I doing next? And yeah, I doubled down into Bitcoin, and I have this saying, which is I came for the money because I thought I was going to get rich, but I stayed for the money, realizing that the money is the most important technology of civilization, and
Got it.
fixing that has all the downstream effects. So yeah, I think that kind of then led me down other rabbit holes like, Austrian economics and sort of sound money principles. And a lot of things seem to kind of thread from that. The people who become quite fanatical about Bitcoin, as you kind of mentioned, is, they start thinking about what they're eating, how they're behaving, morality, virtue. There's a whole Christian movement in the entire Bitcoin space, and
Yes.
people who are deep in the Bitcoin
Part of it.
philosophy, there you go. So it's
Yeah.
like there is a whole thing there, and every time you kind of pull on a bit of a thread, you unwind another section of the rabbit hole. You're like, holy fuck, there's something else here, and yeah, it's just it kept drawing me in, and then I guess to kind of close this loop off in the last 2.5, 3 years with the insanity going on in the world, the only community that I found that seemed to be very like, and it wasn't everyone. There was, some real voices of reason, and not to blow smoke up my ass, but I was one of those. I literally wrote an article in early March saying Corona didn't do it, and I talked about like we're going to be looking back on this shit 2 years from now, after we've decimated families, economies, and markets and everything, and we're going to be blaming it on Corona when that never did it. It was the overreach. And me, Seyfedin, and Francis Puglia, for example, Giacomo Zucco, like all in the Bitcoin space, we were all very vocal from the beginning. And I mean, I got fucking banned from Twitter and YouTube and all sorts of crap like that because of this. But I think that, that sort of entry into Bitcoin when it happened, and the kind of the North Star that it gave me helped me see through all the crap that we've sort of endured in the last couple of years. And then in the process, the stark contrast between what, the truth that something like Bitcoin represents versus the lies that the existing world represents have, in a sense, radicalized me. And then on that journey led me to other things, and here we are.
I appreciate hearing that story because, one of the powerful things that I've encountered about Bitcoin is that it's for transformed men, and it's transformative for men. Right. So men who have transformed, shed skins, myself included, Laser, who we have in common, went through his own transformation. I went through my own transformation. And when I got there, I suddenly realized that Bitcoin was there, and all the pieces of my life had led up to this point of me finally being able to understand what Bitcoin is and was about. And if I hadn't gone on my own journey to really redeem my own past, I wouldn't have been ready to really receive the wisdom that is embodied in Bitcoin. And it sounds really strange to say that about something called Bitcoin, about digital money or whatever it is. But there's this mystical, I don't know what the word is, mystical divine quality to it. And not only that, when I arrived at Bitcoin, it helped transform me further. And so I always, and so I always love hearing men tell these stories because it seems to be just what's true about the technology.
It's both an attractor as exactly what you said. It's an attractor and an accelerant. And it's funny you mentioned this because I was me and Mark Moss, who we wrote the book together with, we were at a little meetup in San Clemente last week, and someone asked that exact question. They were like, "What is it about Bitcoin that does it change people? Does it attract people?" And exactly to your point, I said, my answer to that was it's an attractor and an accelerant, because me, like you, and like Laser, and like probably every other man out there, we've had to go through our own transformations. Like in my mid-20s, man, I was such a fucking bitch. I was such a pussy. I was a total vegan. I was a fucking hippie. Like I went to.
I wasn't a vegan, but yeah, same.
Well, there you go. Like I did that whole thing, and I was such a pleaser. I was such a, like I'd sit there cry over women and all this sort of crap, which I had to forge the man that is here today, and I'm still continually forging him. I think of that sculpture. I don't know who did this one, but it's the one where the guy is kind of chiseling himself out of the stone.
Yes,
I love that sculpture, and that's kind of how I envision what men's role is in the world, is that they need to chisel themselves into the best version of themselves. And it's like, oh fuck, there's so many tangents I want to go on, but like I've just been doing like the French Revolution, looking through that history and just seeing where feminism actually started.
Bang.
Yeah, dude.
Me too.
Yeah, it's
wild.
Like incredible. And this whole, like, I've recently come to think that the root of all evil, or one of the roots of the tree of evil, is this incessant need to help everyone and get in everyone's fucking business. And you see this with all people who are socialistically oriented, where all this feminism, all this sort of shit emerged from, was the French Revolution, this idea of like fucking mass equality, tearing down the patriarchy, giving everyone the same voice, sameness, equality. And this whole like move towards, it is everyone's duty to help everyone. And it's not. Your fucking duty is to help yourself first, make yourself the best version of yourself, and then lead, be an example for others to do the same. Because the more you fucking, like, because I have nothing against people who want to go and help someone. I've got everything against people who try and force others to go and help someone.
Yes.
Where taxation, all that sort of stuff is like, get the fuck out of my business. If you want to help someone, go and help them. But making it like law and mandate and all this sort of stuff, what it does is it creates like an irresponsible society. And, I think the thread of responsibility is, one that we can pull on. But anyway, I'll just back up for a second because I'm about to like scatter into 10 different directions. But
been there,
so much here we can hit.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, this is something that I think a lot about. I think about dependence, independence, and interdependence. And so that goes from, I think these are stages of developmental psychology, how it mirrors in men's lives. We all begin, men and women, in a stage of dependence. We are totally dependent on our mother, right? Without mom, we die, right? And then at about age 7 to 10, something like that, we're taken from the world of the mother into the world of the father. And we're meant to learn independence, right? And a man who succeeds in his journey of independence, who becomes sovereign and embodied, is able to be interdependent with other sovereign men. That's the complete journey of development, right? And so we see this reflected in our society now, where we have this hyper-feminized society that's trying to keep everyone dependent and actually shames independent men to prevent them from ever becoming interdependent with each other. Right. And so we're stuck in this feminized kind of world where it's like, no, don't be independent. We all have to be in this together. We all have to be safe together. Don't listen to those, scary independent. They're bad, toxic masculinity, right? That whole thing. So this is, I mean, it's exactly psychologically represented as well. Everything you're talking about, this feminization that keeps us weak and dependent on a system like a mother.
Absolutely. I mean, the thread of responsibility. So recently I've started thinking about Bitcoin more than just freedom money. So in the past, for a long time, I've called it freedom money. But I've got an article which I've got to hurry up and finish, but it's called Responsibility Go Up Technology. And there's a meme in Bitcoin, which I'm sure you know of, but for the listeners who haven't heard of it, the Bitcoiners started calling Bitcoin, that, because everyone kind of like, so what's so special about Bitcoin? Bitcoin is as we do. We just meme everything. So it's got this unique thing called NGU technology. And people are like, oh, what's that? It's like, number go up. Because just what it does. It goes up and to the right.
Yeah.
And I think that was a fantastic meme. And it's going to stay true for, decades, most likely. The thing is, I think there's a deeper meme. And this is this RGU technology, like responsibility go up technology. And for me, this is where I think about Bitcoin and I think about what it represents. And I think about it in terms of this idea of like masculine money. Like the masculine exists, and I think the highest virtue of masculinity is responsibility. And maybe there's some semantics there, like one could argue freedom or integrity or whatever, but like I think responsibility is up there, at least with the top three of the virtues of the masculine. It's like, as Joe says, a man must bear responsibility of all things, right? So that to me is just so profoundly important. And what Bitcoin doesn't, and I used to say it in different words a couple of years ago. People used to ask me, well, what do you think the most important thing about Bitcoin is? And I used to say, man, it's the reintroduction of economic consequence. And I said, that doesn't sound pretty, but what it means is that Bitcoin will usher in a time in human civilization where the reward or the risk and consequence of your actions will actually be borne by you, not by anybody else. In the world we live in today, what we do is we vote in bureaucrats, or bureaucrats take power without a vote, whatever the case is. Then they make collective economic and political decisions, which are paid for by all of us. And when they go wrong, which they go wrong 99.9% of the time, we pay for them. And then as we pay for them, we get impoverished, and they just print more money. And because they don't feel the consequence, they do it again. And we have this vicious loop of basically the decay of society through the socialization of consequence and the removal of responsibility and agency of the individual.
Yes.
And I guess this is what you said earlier, is that we can't even get to the interdependence of man because we don't even have independence of man anymore. We've given up agency to some institution known as the state or the central bank or the government or whatever fucking talking head is sitting there. And as we've done that, we've become a race of irresponsible, overgrown children, basically. There's all the men have left the room. And coming back to Bitcoin, it's like the ultimate responsible money. Not only is it responsible at the macro scale, which is if I go and do something stupid, let's say I run a territory, or I run a city, for example. Let's just say Bitcoin has become so valuable, I have the ability to run a city. I still, if I make a dumb decision, I cannot socialize the dumb decision on everybody else. I'll have spent my own Bitcoin. There's no money printed to print. There's no way to forcibly tax, and there's no way to borrow Bitcoin from some magical future. It doesn't exist. So at a macro scale, it enforces responsibility and it localizes consequence and cost. And then at a micro scale, as an individual, I always say this to people. I'm like, do you want to know how real Bitcoin is? Get some Bitcoin, send it to a Ethereum address, and then call the Bitcoin support hotline and see if anyone's going to help you.
Wait on hold for a while.
Correct. It doesn't exist. So basically, the entire onus of Bitcoin is on you. Like when you act, you have massive responsibility. It's all yours. You actually, for the first time in history, hold your own money. Like your own keys is your own money. No power on earth, no power that we know of in the universe can alter the mathematics that that makes the sanctity of that holding valid. And as a result, the whole Spider-Man saying, with great power comes great responsibility. Like you have the ultimate responsibility. So it kind of, thinking about it that way, I just think of this whole responsibility go up technology meme. And then as a subset to that is the whole essence of masculinity is taking responsibility. And to me, like Bitcoin just seems to be this, I don't know, this force that will come back into society and reinstantiate the patriarchy and masculine frame to a large degree, because you'll have responsible adults come back in, and only they will have the opportunity to prosper, because those who are irresponsible will be economically damaged. Whereas in the last 150 years, those who were irresponsible managed to get an economic edge, while those who were responsible, we lost our savings, we lost all this stuff. We weren't able to act responsibly. The world's been upside down. So that to me is a profound idea.
That's an incredibly profound idea, all of that, because it brings back into the realm of masculinity the notion of consequence. Like your economic and financial decisions have real consequence. There's no printing money to bail you out. There's no Cantillon effect. There's none of that. It's that when you make a mistake, It's gone, and it's gone forever. And so you have to be more responsible. In fact, to your to what you said about masculinity, Pastor Doug Wilson, who's one of the best thinkers and speakers about masculinity today, he says masculinity is the glad assumption of sacrificial responsibility. Right? He defines it exactly that way. It's beautiful. And so it's perfect that you understand that as a man, you now bear, what is it? Yeah, like Jer, by the way, pour some out for Jer. He got banned from Twitter for a week today. So
really? Oh,
yeah. Laser and Jer both got banned for a week. So pour some out for the homies. Right. It's ridiculous. So to bear responsibility for all things. So there's something very fundamental about that. But even in a fiat world, like, yes, okay, there are still consequences for making bad decisions financially for the average man, right? But even in a fiat world, your inflation takes away the value of your money anyway, so you're going to experience negative consequences no matter what you do. You can make the best decisions ever with fiat money, and you will still suffer from the consequences of someone else's decisions, right?
Others, exactly.
That's right. So it's like it puts it all back on you.
It deranges everything, basically, because as I said, it actually changes the calculus. And I'm just about to finish writing another article for the Bitcoin Times publication that I do, and this one talks about how Bitcoin makes it takes Austrian economics from the realm of theory and it puts it in the place of in the realm of practice, right?
Yes.
Because Austrian economics has always been a theory or an ideology or a study of individual responsibility, political and economic restraint, which don't exist today anymore. It talks about like allowing the freedom for people to act, but also giving them the responsibility for the consequences of their decisions. So Austrian economics has basically been this kind of sound set of principles, and it's been completely disregarded because for the last 150 years, when the temptation to eat the forbidden fruit, to push the button that makes you basically readjust the game,
money printer go burr,
to your benefit, exactly. It's just been too damn strong. So there hasn't been any like quote unquote alpha by being responsible or maintaining some restraint. So what happens is the quote unquote the most intelligent and maybe morally flexible of us what have they done? They've run to Wall Street, they've run to Silicon Valley, they've built basically dick pic apps and gambling apps, and basically the whole world has kind of skewed in a weird direction because incentives matter. Like, and this is the thing. It's like if you incentivize all of that crap, then why would someone sit there and continue doing the right thing and just get whipped and whipped and whipped and whipped? It kind of erodes people over time, and to a large degree, you can see why there's so much, I guess.
Corruption.
There's nihilism, there's corruption, there's like all of these sort of downstream psychological manifestations of basically a rigged game. No one wants to play a rigged game.
Yeah, I mean, without religion at the core of your society, if people aren't making that moral, eternal calculation, then the clear incentive in terms of game theory is what? We know what that is. It's to compete. It's to compete when someone else cooperates, right? So take advantage. That's what it proves. Like maybe not long term, but yeah, meant people who are morally flexible, who don't have a conscience, because whether or not we have religion in society, men still have a conscience, with the exception of the psychopaths out there, which is just a thing, which is worthy of talking about probably. But people like, why should I play the game fairly? Why should I play the game righteously when clearly the people who cheat win the game? So I'll go and do that. And voila, now here we are. Unless a man feels a moral call within himself to behave righteously, if only so he can sleep at night, right? Which that's a thing.
And it is. But the thing is, it gets really tricky because, and I think Jordan Peterson said this really well in one of his interviews. He said the way, I think he used the Nazi prison camps, the guards as an example. It's like they didn't go from being a soldier to a prison guard overnight. It's like someone close to them, got them just to like transgress their morality a little bit, and they felt guilty about it. But once you've transgressed just a little bit, you can't sleep at night and all of this. But then to try and rationalize to prove to yourself that you're a good person, you'll kind of forget about it. You'll bury it, and then you'll be asked to transgress just a little bit more again.
Yes.
And, you won't feel right about it, but, you've already done it once. It's like, okay, it can't hurt. Just one more time. Just one more time, and I won't do it again.
Last time.
That's it. You do it a little bit more. And then after you do that 10, 15, 20 times, you're all the way out here, and you started out here, and you're like, how did that happen? Well, it happened inch by inch.
Yeah.
It didn't happen in one shot. This is exactly what happens to people. Is like corruption and moral decay is a process of decay. It's not a process of abrupt transformation. It happens over time, and to a large degree, trying to be a moral person, and being surrounded by just basically the status quo of immorality, of high time preference, of poor behaviors and everything, it kind of eats away at you. And not everyone is, technically nobody is Jesus Christ, right? Like
one guy
may
was
have been able to resist that. One guy, right?
Yeah.
And the rest of us, like, we're going to make mistakes, and we're going to be dragged down certain roads. So it really takes a level of character, a level of chutzpah, a level of whatever phraseology we want to give it to kind of resist that. And this is where stuff like what you're doing, what Jer is doing, like what other people in the sort of masculine space are doing, like building a commonwealth of men, like, is really powerful, because that's sort of what you need to resist the siren call of the maniacs.
And haven't we learned that the past 2 years? Right? Like, what was COVID? I mean, COVID was many things, but what was it besides the siren call of just capitulate just a little bit? Wear the mask, wear just wear it into this shop. Oh, just take one. Don't worry. It's just a regular jab. Just take, it's going to take one. Oh no, sorry, it's going to take two. No, it's going to take three, and then vaccine, and then more masking. And it's just like men and women have capitulated inch by inch along that path. And then look the other way on this election thing. Like, we're going to lie, cheat, and steal, and you just do your thing, right? And to the point where people are so morally compromised in their own consciences over what they absolutely must know in their heart is wrong, that they can no longer tell wrong from right, except for what they're told by the TV. And people's consciences now are completely numb, such that I was having a conversation with someone recently, and we were talking about politics and stuff like that. And I was like, do you know that Hunter Biden is a crack-addicted whoremonger? Like, do you think... Yes, I do know that. Do you think that that's relevant to the character of the president? No, I don't think it's relevant at all.
Yes,
right?
That's
insane. Like, come on. Like, any father would be judged by the character of his son. And if he were only addicted to crack and posting and recording every minute of his hedonistic lifestyle, that would be one thing. But he's involved with his father's business dealings in Ukraine. This is not negotiable. And not only is this coming out now, this was out before the election, and that was framed as Russian disinformation, right? And now it was validated in all these disgusting ways. And the thing is, you point to something that is so objectively clear and true and immoral and illegal and disgusting morally like that, and people are so like, yeah, no, I don't think that matters. And it's like, oh dear. Oh dear, is my response.
This is, it's... When everything matters, nothing matters, and that's what's kind of happened over the last 2 years. Like, everything mattered. Like, oh, you can't go out, you can't breathe on someone.
Yeah.
It's like everything matters. So it's like mass hysteria, and it's funny. Before this whole, the Hunter Biden stuff actually came out, and we saw it. Basically, someone was asking me, they're like, what do you think they're prepping for? And I was like, you know what? I don't think anything that comes out at the moment is going to do anything, because people are so over hystericized to the point that there could be zombies walking across the street. People are like, oh, it's Monday. Like,
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I think, and that's a dangerous place to be, because that's kind of the boy who cried wolf, right? It's
right.
Like, then when something bad actually does happen, and I was like, whatever. Like,
yeah,
we're just, and this is kind of, I don't know, we seem to, this is, apathy, nihilism, kind of deliberate ignorance, because as you said, the person who was saying that to you, same thing. Like, somebody, I tweeted, I was something about that, and then someone was, maybe it was the other way around. Actually, yeah, that idiot Eric Voorhees, who's the shitcoiner.
Oh yeah, my favorite subject.
He tweeted, he's like, all these people trying to point the finger at Biden because of his son missing the point, and I'm like, what the fuck is wrong with you? Like, I just couldn't handle it. I'm like, what point are they missing? I'm like,
Right.
if that's how my child behaved, like that is an impression on me. Now, I understand, like me and Trav. Are you familiar with Trav?
Yeah, it's Trav Stewart, formerly Metatrav. Yeah, he's great.
Yeah.
His
He's a legend.
Yeah.
So he and I have spoken a lot about like nature versus nurture, and I do think there is, like, nature is extraordinarily powerful, and in fact, it may be more important than nurture in many ways, because like I think it's kind of the core of the being, and then you can mold it in particular ways, and that's where the father's presence really is important, because the father can introduce restraint and help mold someone with a weird nature in better ways. But I mean, it's not that, like, it doesn't negate the responsibility of the individual and how they behave, and then what the father's presence was, particularly on the son. I mean, the father must have a presence on both, but like the son in many ways emulates the father, and I don't know, man. Like,
wow.
Yeah, I just think people trying to brush that off as not important, like, they know it's important, and they're deliberately being ignorant. And what else are they deliberately ignorant about?
Yes.
Everything else in their life.
Everything. Well, everything of consequence. Like, someone can be very responsible in their life. They can live skillfully. They can be successful in their career. They can even be, in interpersonal interactions, good and decent and honest. And this is the big contradiction, right? But then someone who fails to be able to acknowledge the significance that the son of the president of the United States flies around the world doing these just horrible things, like horrible, disgusting things, like, how is that not relevant? And someone who can't recognize how relevant that is, there's a degree of moral compromise there. And that's the problem, is that, this is so widespread that people are morally compromised, that it's kind of shocking and a little frightening, because I've recently, been kind of accepting that, well, maybe everything is kind of in free fall. Maybe this is just what's happening, and I need to brace for impact more than I have. And I want to drive us back onto the Bitcoin road, because a big part of that is well, if everything in our lives is going to be taken from us, right, that we've gotten used to over the past, say, 50 or so years, this comfort and prosperity of modernity, it's all going to be snatched away in some great reset. How do we begin building sovereignty as men? Because that is our first responsibility, right? To go from dependence, which we've all been, cultivated to be. We've all been, you were, probably everyone listening has been cultivated to be dependent to a certain degree. We're exploring independence, and we're thinking about interdependence. How do we truly establish independence in thought, in mind, in heart, in body, and in finance? And Bitcoin gives the possibility for first true independence and interdependence financially, to help protect from this free fall situation that we might be in with people with compromised moral compasses.
Oops, I muted myself. Yeah. So totally. I think I've said in the past that savings is the cornerstone of civilization. In the same way that we pass down the written word, we pass the stored product of our labor, basically, our stored value in the form of money, this language of value, we pass it on in the same way we do teachings, morality, ideas, all this stuff. Now, imagine what kind of a civilization we'd have if every time the elders died, like if we never had writing, and if we never had the ability to pass anything on, like the memory died with each generation, we'd never progress.
Yeah.
You can't. Like we just be learning the same thing. We wouldn't even have the fucking wheel today, right? So civilization itself builds upon the savings of the prior generation and the prior generation and the prior generation. So we must be able to do that. And for me, at a macro scale, that's sort of the function and the role savings plays. It helps us build a top of something, so we can continue constructing.
Yes.
Because once again, like we as human beings, we're builders, we're engineers, we're creators. That's what we do. We progress civilization and our species forward. Then at the micro scale as individuals, in order to move beyond kind of like base animal instincts and like the need for survival today, we must be able to store the excess product of our labor in a form so that we can access it tomorrow. And by doing so, we actually lower our time preference. So time preference for, I mean, I'm sure you're familiar with the term, but for people listening,
thank you.
Time preference is the relative value you place on the future versus today. Now, the future is always, because it comes with a degree of uncertainty, the future is always valued less than today. So you always have, you always have a negative time preference, which is, you will always value the future less than today. Now, the thing is, if you have a high time preference, so if your numerator, which is the present over the future, is extremely high, meaning that you value today but you have zero value for tomorrow, you're basically an animal. You're just looking to quickly eat, fuck, sleep. That's it. That's all you care about. But as you lower the time preference, as you start to value the future more and get close to that, the equation, if like the future was valued at the same amount as the present, it would be 1. That's like the lowest time preference possible. But as you start to lower that, what happens is you can start to think about tomorrow. You can start to think about, maybe I need to build a tool, or maybe I need to provide for more than just me. Maybe I need to think about a family. Maybe I need to think about a woman, children. Maybe I need to think about my community. And as you expand your time preference, as you lengthen your time horizon, you're able to become, you basically climb the hierarchy of responsibility. You become responsible for more. You take on more. You bear the burden of responsibility. You bear the responsibility of all things. In order to do that, a mechanism for savings must exist. You can't do it if your wealth is obliterated every week. And that's why you see in civilizations where you have bad money, you don't have any savings and you don't have civilization, and you have a bunch of people running around rampant, shooting, killing, and stabbing each other, trying to claim power for now, trying to eat, trying to do whatever they can. Civilization can only function when you have a functional money, and that is hands down, if you want to plot the rise and fall or the progress of anything throughout civilization, it is all linked to the money. And this, for me, like Bitcoin for the first time, gives us sound money that we are individually responsible for, that we can interact with. So we can be interdependent with Bitcoin, because my Bitcoin talks to your Bitcoin, my wallet talks to your wallet. But we're able to do this outside of the permission of a group or an institution or bank, government, whatever group you want to give it. Like we're able to do this through the magic of mathematics. And that fundamentally has never existed before, and for me that is like a step change in the quality of civilization. The kind of step change as a metaphor that people could think of is like, I think of money as, I've said many things like language of value, etc., but it really is like, it's how you evaluate things. Like, you're evaluating the future, you're evaluating things and stuff and opportunities and everything. It's like we all keep a kind of like a running tally of the value of things in the back of our mind, and money just helps us abstract that away in a way that we can value more stuff and make better decisions and basically orient. Now, with crap money, we're all sinfully orienting ourselves. We are off the mark. We are all sinning. We're all making poor value judgments, poor evaluations. And the downstream complex effect of that is complete pandemonium, where nobody knows what the fuck they're doing, why they're doing it, when they're doing it. It's like complete mindlessness. So to come back to that metaphor that I was about to say, is today's civilization is like a blind man building a house with an elastic tape measure. So the money is the measure. Like, we're using an elastic one because it just changes all the fucking time. And we're blind because we can't orient ourselves. We have no savings. We're just like grabbing shit and we're trying. The quality of a civilization on a Bitcoin standard is like a sighted individual building a house with a fixed tape measure. Like, think about the difference in the quality of those two structures. That's the difference in the level of quality of civilization we'll have post-Bitcoin and pre-Bitcoin. So anyway, I've gone off on a huge tangent there, but I guess to your initial question / comment around, like, Bitcoin being one of the pillars, I just have to argue that it is the most important pillar, because against the specter of Bitcoin's reality, human beings are not forced by coercion to become better. They are forced in the same way as gravity compels them not to jump off a cliff.
Yes.
It's not that gravity is evil. It's just, it's there, so you don't jump off the fucking cliff. So you actually orient yourself against the reality of Bitcoin. And that, for me, is fundamentally important. And then the question then comes, how do we behave as individuals? How do we show up? Who are we? Masculine, feminine, polarity and dynamics, like all these other things start to come, food, energy, etc., start to come downstream from that. But if we sort of fix that kernel in the beginning, your orientation about all the other stuff starts to matter. You can no longer lie to yourself without having a consequence that sort of echoes right back at you. And to me, that, it's just, once again, profoundly important. And I think we fix in the short term, we create a lot of problems because the world's not ready for responsibility. But in the long term, after iterations of responsible people coming up and leading, I think we have a much more functional world 200-300 years from now, after a few generations have washed through and learnt what it means to be a responsible man and a responsible leader, versus a fucking Hunter Biden coke junkie. Yes.
This is fantastic. Because, I mean, just to break a bunch of things down, the function, what our money does determines how we behave, right? So if we earn, say, $100 and we put it in a savings account, and inflation means that it's worth so much less in a short period of time, our incentive is to take that $100 and maximize its value by spending it, right? So right away, just spend it, get it, spend it, get it, spend it, get it, spend it. That disincentivizes us to save. And without savings, without generational wealth, children get trapped in this, essentially the same economic strata, the same class over multiple generations. Like, generational wealth is built up as generational wealth, as savings. But if you're disincentivized to save, as a father, you'll teach your son. You won't teach your son to save, right? And so he'll end up in the same class probably, versus if you as a father save and you hand down morality and a nest egg to your son, he can do amazing things with that and begin building, right? But with inflationary money, the incentive now for the father, inflationary fiat, the incentive for the father isn't to save, or for anybody to save, just spend it, right? Versus Bitcoin. Go ahead, sorry. Jump in.
It's to spend. I was just going to say, it's to spend, or to what they call today investing, which is really gambling.
Sure.
Like, it's nobody's business to go out there, like an entire system, an entire fucking set of industries have emerged around, like, financial planning and fucking IRAs and 401ks and ETFs and all this shit that nobody needs. Like, this dawned on me for the first time about 3-4 years ago. Like, so my mum, she's a great woman. She's working class, like, been working her ass off all her life. And I remember going to a cafe with her about 3 or 4 years ago, and this was one of the first times the real visceral importance of Bitcoin dawned on me. She's like, I've saved up all this money, and she goes, I don't know what to do with it. She goes, I'm putting it in the bank. They're not giving me anything anymore. She goes, last time I gave your brother money, like, and my brother's one of these degenerate fucking gamblers, thinking he's like, I call him a degenerate gambler, but in the sense of, like, he spends his life staring at a fucking screen, reading charts, thinking that he's going to make money. Like, the most unproductive behavior a human being can do just sit there, basically jerk off on watching porn and watch charts so that you can make a quick buck trading, right? Like that's literally what we've got. A whole millions of people doing that now.
You
and
you
what
used
do
to
they
do
call
it
themselves?
too.
I work from home. I used to do it too.
Yeah,
Fuck
okay.
yeah. I used to do that shit too. So I speak from experience. It's like, we go and we've deformed everybody. And she's sitting there saying like, I don't know what to do with my money. And like, for 99.9% of people, investing is a complete fucking scam.
Yep.
And spending all of your money on consumables is complete stupidity. So what are people living in? They're living in complete sin because they're scammed or they're stupid. And all they had to do was save, but they can't. They're penalized for doing the moral thing.
Yes.
And that, like, to quickly tie that back to time preference is, if you have some savings, you can actually stop for a minute. And one of the most important things for a man to do is to take stock, stop, slow down, and make a rational decision. Stop acting emotionally. Stop racing and running and being on a fucking rat race on a whatever that wheel is called.
Hamster wheel.
Rats are on. Hamster wheel. That's it. Like doing that is like living in a constant state of angst, fear, and anxiety, which is, that's the feminine realm. That's where all these men are. They can't stop for a moment and say, okay, I've worked. I built up some wealth. Here it is. And now I can raise my gaze and I can think about what I want to do down the track. I can lower my time preference and I can actually behave like a responsible adult, not like some teenager with fucking allowance that's going to run out and I don't know what to do tomorrow. Like that's how everyone is behaving. And this is where, once again, savings is so important for time preference. Time preference is inherently linked to morality. The more moral you are, the lower your time preference. Those two things are inextricably linked. And we've destroyed time preference completely. And everyone is behaving like children or animals who have zero respect for the future. Like they have a complete, they're basically, their time preference is trending towards infinity. Because their value for the future is zero. And that's a disaster. So anyway, sorry to interject there.
No, that's okay.
I think that's a important soundbite.
No, I mean, I agree. And what I love about conversations about Bitcoin is that it literally, it's not like a road, it's a web. You just follow your own unique path through the conversation because it touches on so many different philosophical topics, because it gets straight to the heart of morality. Like, just like Laser talks about, monetary reset and how Bitcoin is a weapon against monetary reset, right? These reflections that you've had on morality and behavior and masculinity are just as an important a set of topics, because our money guides our behavior. Our money is our expression of choice. Our money is an expression of almost freedom in a way. And if what we do with our money is constrained by the nature of the money itself, right, in a negative way, in the way that fiat constrains, it forces us in the direction of high time preference, of short-term thinking, because we can't actually save it, or we're trying to magnify it through gambling. If it forces our decisions, because it's not a morally neutral technology, fiat currency is not a morally neutral technology. It guides us now, at least how it's being used now. It guides us toward these sets of decisions. So if we can replace that technology, that morally, we won't even say corrupt technology, fiat currency, with a morally righteous technology of Bitcoin, we will naturally guide our decisions towards more righteous directions. And that's how fundamental this gets. And it seems odd to think that something like Bitcoin or digital money or whatever you want to call it would guide men's decisions in terms of morality, but it does very powerfully. And that's why I think Christianity and masculinity and Bitcoin are such deeply intertwined and interconnected subjects, because they all guide us towards a more low time preference, high morality, savings oriented way of being, which begins with responsibility and consequence for our decisions, bearing personal responsibility for our decisions rather than outsourcing the consequences of our decisions. All these things are fundamentally linked and so important for men to get.
Absolutely. I couldn't have said it better myself, man. Like, that was really well summed up. And I think this little subset of the ecosystem, that blend of like Christian morality, theology slash masculinity slash Bitcoin, like that kind of Venn diagram is my favorite, man.
Same.
Like, it's the rabbit hole that I'm like going down right now, because it's so much fun. Because like, once you do the economics piece and you got that locked away, then it's kind of like, what else? And this is such a such a powerful area because it's been under attack for so long. And I think Bitcoin like will just take care of the economics part easiest. I think that's also one of the lower hanging fruits for Bitcoin to solve. It's like, okay, can't print the money. Well, bad luck. Fuck you. Keynesianism is no longer the alpha. You like literally can't do anything. And it actually makes me think of I don't know how familiar you are with like the medieval Japanese sort of era with like the samurais and this concept of a bushido. Have you ever
the
heard of
Bushido
that
code of the
terminology?
samurai, like the
Yeah,
warrior code of the samurai. Yeah, but if some of the listeners aren't, go for it. Like fill us in, because I may not know what you know.
yeah. So the for those who don't know what the word bushido means, it actually means way of the man, or way of the warrior in Japanese. So what it was, it's kind of like I guess the West had its equivalent in chivalry in a sense, but the Bushido was kind of a little bit more well formed in a sense, and it kind of emerged off the back of when the warring period between the daimyos and basically the daimyos were kind of like the I wouldn't call them kings, they were kind of like more like dukes probably of the lands, and they kind of warred, and then there was one shogunate who kind of united all of Japan. And post that there was a relative period of peace, and you had all these samurais who were warriors before, and the question to ask themselves is like, okay, we're a higher class of being, like we were the warrior class, kind of like the knights in Western Christendom. How must we behave? And it's funny how this similar sort of thing emerged in the West as in Japan. There was this kind of moral code, and it was the way of the warrior, the way of the man. And to be a samurai wasn't just to be born a samurai and to know how to wield a sword, but it was how to behave as a man, as a leader, as someone from the samurai class. And to me, I just found this really interesting as I was looking at it, because you look at the code. There's no word love there, which is really interesting. Even the Japanese language is the closest word they have to love is actually duty, which is really interesting.
Oh wow.
But you look at the virtues, and I'm going to kind of rattle them off because I don't remember them exactly. But it's courage, bravery, honesty, integrity, compassion, responsibility, duty, honor, like this whole set of values, which it was never like a written code. It was always like an unspoken code.
Yeah.
But it was how one must behave. And this was the class of man. Like there was no samurai women. There was, I guess, let me rephrase that. There was samurai women in the sense that they were married to a samurai.
Yeah.
But, they were the wife of the samurai, but they were not the samurai themselves. They wouldn't go out and fight because the men carried that burden. That was their responsibility. This responsibility of the wife was to take care of the household, and that they had this very strong delineation between the roles, and it was a very functional, stable, strong society. It all got fucked up when the post revolutionary fucking Europeans went there and destroyed the whole thing, but that's another story.
Yeah.
But this idea of a Bushido, so I'm writing an article which I really want to turn into a book next year. It's called The Bushido of Bitcoin. And the premise of the book is, how must we as Bitcoiners, because we are going to inherit the world, like as cocky as that sounds, and as maybe arrogant as that sounds to people, like those of us who get it, who will acquire the Bitcoin, who will lock it up, who will secure it, who will be responsible, who will endure through the clown world segment of civilization that we're in, we're going to come out the other end disproportionately wealthy compared to the rest of the world.
Yeah.
So if we are going to have that, with great power comes great responsibility, how must we then behave? And I think this sort of moral code needs to start to be thought of. So I really want to write this book as a kind of like a guidebook for people. And basically, I mean, all I'm going to be doing is rehashing, Christian principles and, principles of the Bushido. But I want to kind of like write it for our times and have people think about, once you've sort of solved the money piece, what comes next? Because we are the new stewards of the world. And the
Mm-hmm.
last thing we want to do is do what, the stewards of 250 years ago did, which was tear down the fucking patriarchy and destroy everything,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and bring us to where we are today, where everything is fucking back to front. So we don't want a repeat of that. We want to, Bitcoin will always be an economic check, but we need to, kind of institute, a moral and social check on a lot of this stuff. And basically it's going to be predicated on, don't tread on me, stay the fuck out of my way, be responsible for yourself, and we are interdependent, and there's stuff there. And I'm by no means going to be the authority on all of it, but I hope that I'll be able to spark some thinking off the back of this kind of writing, so that people can go away and think about, like, how do I want to behave, and what do I want to, what kind of moral code do I want to pass on to my kids? Because in many ways, whilst we'll probably be wealthy, we'll be in our later years by the time all of this happens. So we'll have had to pass the world on to our children and our children's children. How are they going to behave? Do we want little, entitled fucking brats to be running around, with more money than they know what to do with?
Right.
Or do we want stewards to pass the world on to? I think that's, to your original point. It's like, what are the other things that we need to think about in this period?
Yeah, to go back to something we said earlier, Bitcoin is not a magic bullet. It's not a magic solution to a man's life. And so I want to make sure in checking our language that it's the impression isn't communicated that all you got to do is get some Bitcoin and you're fine. Like, no, obviously not. But what we said earlier is that Bitcoin is an attractor and an accelerant, right? An attractor isn't the road itself, right? It attracts you towards it, and then it accelerates the journey that you're already on. So we make sure that it's not like Bitcoin is this magic bullet to heal every wrong in a man's life. Bitcoin obviously, needs to go along with masculinity, with Christianity and Christian values, which I think are woven into the fabric of the universe. Like, I don't think it's rehashing.
Absolutely.
Right. So I don't think it's rehashing anything to say, like, oh, by the way, this is how reality is, because for some men don't agree with that. And, sorry, but, so you're not rehashing this idea that someone came up with. You're making hard observations about the nature of reality that people constantly need to be reminded of, right? Because we haven't passed down sound financial thinking. We haven't passed down sound moral thinking. It wasn't passed down to us. We're rediscovering these things. Like, what makes Bitcoin powerful, what makes Christianity powerful, what makes masculinity powerful. I want to back up on that for a second. Okay, because Christianity and masculinity, these ideas were already in the world. Like, masculinity got lost in rediscovering it. Christianity is having sort of a revival. We're rediscovering it. I have to, maybe we can go down this rabbit hole a little bit. I think the things that Bitcoin makes possible, I don't know that they were ever actually out there in society. So Bitcoin might not be a rediscovery, but a discovery for the first time, right? Maybe we can kick that around, but just to close the thought, masculinity, Christianity, or we might say values, warrior values, Bushido values, all these things are out there, and they all need to fit together to produce the kind of man who will inherit the world. And I did want to highlight that word inherit. The meek shall inherit the earth, right? Is the saying. The word meek means strength, like a sword sheathed, right? Like that.
Yes.
They will inherit the earth. But the important thing is the word inherit, because when do you inherit something? You inherit something when someone dies, right? So we hear this phrase over and over again. It's like, inherit doesn't mean, here, you can have this. It means something else dies so that something else can be. So I agree with you that we will inherit the world, but the process of inheritance, that's not always a fun and exciting process, right?
Let's pull on that thread, because this is one where, I kind of, when I jump into Twitter spaces or stuff like that, people are like, what do you think? And a lot of kind of what you said in the beginning is people get caught up. It's funny the journey people go on when they find Bitcoin, because it genuinely fills them with hope and optimism. But then some of them, naturally go off the deep end with hope and optimism, and they think that, I don't need to work on myself, and everything else is fine. Just buy some Bitcoin, and then everything's fine. And I think that is so wrong. No, I don't think that happens too much, because I think those who really when Bitcoin dawns on them, you have these 10 thousand branches that kind of come off, and you got people wanting to filling their freezers up with fucking meat and going out learning to shoot and hunt and all this kind of crap, kind of comes off the back of that, right?
You talking about me, bro?
Yeah,
Got a freezer right over there. Yeah.
So it's, I kind of try and sober people up a little bit when they ask me. It's like, what do you think? And I think of this idea of kind of like before Bitcoin and after Bitcoin, and they're going to be two different worlds, and the quality of each world is going to be very different. But as you said, there's going to be a transition, and that process of inheritance is going to be ugly. And I kind of think of that as there's this idea of, there's this word called interregnum, which basically means the time between one king and another, right? Or the time between one ruler and another. And the interregnum, or the period of transition, whatever we want to call it, is going to be messy. And in fact, I think it's going to be the ugliest part of all of it, because we have this period right now, and I mean, we're kind of in the interregnum, actually. We're kind of 12 years in, because the Bitcoin point was in 2008. But it's going to, a couple of things are going to happen. Number one is that the clown world will continue to accelerate, because what do clowns do when the car is losing control? They make it lose more control. So they'll keep doubling down on stupid policies, on bad monetary decisions, on more clampdowns, more reasons to lock down. Like Europe is locking down now because it's 36 degrees, which is, I think, in Fahrenheit, it's like 98, right? Like, it's a walk in the park here in Texas, bro.
Right.
So civilization will get softer, and the idiots driving the train are gonna just like keep pushing every button that they can push, whether through malice, or I think a large part of it is just what you would call the useful idiots, the ones who genuinely think we've got a climate crisis or whatever else they've got on their list of boxes to tick.
The current thing.
The current thing. So they were just pushing every single button to try and fix everything, and in the process break everything. And you're going to have that kind of accelerating. That's going to cause prices to increase across the board. People are going to start panicking about, fuel and food. Like fuel and food are like really, really, really important.
Yeah,
they're
choke
the two
points.
things that, like everything kind of revolves around that. So you'll have that happening. Simultaneously, what you'll have is this kind of period where, in the pandemonium, like opportunists will come out, and you'll have kind of otherwise intelligent hackers and all this sort of stuff. They'll be stealing people's Bitcoin. There'll be phishing scams. There'll be every scam under the sun during this interregnum of people who, if they're not really wised up, if they haven't really taken personal responsibility for their Bitcoin or whatever, like, we've just seen it in one element with the whole Celsius and BlockFi thing. Like, Bitcoiners have been shouting from the rooftops for years, not your keys, not your coins, get your shit off BlockFi, get your shit off Celsius. And everyone's like, oh, bro, you're just a fucking, naysayer, you just,
so dumb.
You sit in there holding your Bitcoin in your own wallet and you're not earning anything. Here I'm earning 6% interest, and now fucking here we are, a year and a half later, you got nothing, bro. So, like, we've been sort of yelling all this stuff, but, no one's obviously listening, because the way of the world, it's like, hand my responsibility to someone else and I just get free shit for no reason. Right?
Yeah.
So all of this stuff's going to happen, and what you're going to see is, as I said, there'll be hacks, there'll be theft, there'll be all sorts of stuff in the interregnum, because there's going to be chaos. Like the very paradigm is shifting. The very primitives of the old civilization versus new civilization are going to shift, and particularly because we've deviated so far away. Like if we had discovered Bitcoin in 1750, as an example, maybe the shift wouldn't have been so catastrophic as it would be now. But we've the Overton window has shifted so far towards egalitarianism, towards feminism, towards democracy, towards all of these
communism,
idiotic ideas. Yeah, communism, leftism, we're all in this together, stupidity. That swinging the pendulum back to responsibility is going to go through a whole host of like opportunities for I guess, the less scrupulous out there, the opportunists out there, to take advantage. And unfortunately, heaps of people are going to get taken advantage of. And then what that's going to do is it's going to make them bitter. And one thing I'm concerned about, and this is for me, like what I'm thinking long term about what I want to do with family and things like that, is I want to be out of the way of, the biggest mistake I think I've made in my entire Bitcoin career is making myself a real public figure around Bitcoin, because the vitriol is going to get pointed at or pointed toward Bitcoiners. It's our fault the inflation went up. It's our fault I lost my money. But that's what's going to happen, right?
Yeah,
and
of course.
So the kind of like what happened when the Weimar Republic in the late stages of it, as it was hyperinflating, who was to blame? The speculators.
Right.
No, the speculators were just in the right place at the right time. Yeah, they were trading this and that. But who else was to blame other than the speculators? The people who hoarded gold and hoarded, food and foodstuffs and things like that. And a lot of those people were, lo and behold, were Jewish. So, the hatred didn't actually start with the Jews specifically. It started off with the people who were hoarding. It just happened to be a large proportion of them were Jewish. So then it's like, okay, let's move on to this angle. And then step by step, we ended up with, that atrocity. So we as Bitcoiners are kind of in a precarious situation because we, want to kind of slap some sense into everybody, but we paint a target on our backs in doing so. And depending on how messy things get over the next decade, because I think this decade is really going to be the crux of the interregnum.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know how much blame ends up falling at our feet. Like, they'll throw everything at Bitcoin. They'll say, oh, the oceans are boiling over and, it's the Bitcoin miners. We have inflation and that's because of Bitcoin. Like, we have food prices are high, that's because we don't have the energy and that's because of Bitcoin. Like, they'll try and blame everything at it. And that's going to be a tricky thing to navigate. And this is why, like, a lot of the content that we need to build, like, I think we are doing the right thing by getting ahead of all of this stuff and really talking about the morality around Bitcoin and all of that sort of stuff. The more we can kind of spread that message, this is where things like, responsibility go up technology, morality go up technology, like all these sort of ideas are really important, because if we can kind of embed that in kind of the consciousness of people, it'll make it just a much harder thing to attack if we've got a bit of the moral high ground. So anyway, that's kind of, I wanted to pull on that thread around, like, it's going to be ugly during the interregnum. And I think people should not kid themselves that it's going to be all sunshine and roses, because the paradigm is just too different. Like, if there was a little bit more proximity between now and the future, one could argue that it's going to be a transition. It'll be a technological disruption, which never killed anybody. It just put a few people out of business. This is a social, civilizational, political, economic, all of these revolutions kind of all bundled into one. It's a powder fucking keg. So we need to think more deeply about what we do to navigate that.
Well said. Well said. I mean, because the empire will blame whatever it needs to accomplish whatever goals. Doesn't matter whether the blame is accurate or not, or there's anything, it'll construct whatever narrative it needs to, right? And so we've been living in a period of time where Christianity and masculinity have been blamed for us being here. Patriarchy, right? Right? That's how we got here as a civilization. And so it makes sense that, Bitcoin will take on some of that as well, just to be prepared, for an all out assault, right, on the things that are most precious. And I'm glad that we got here, because I think it gets right to the heart of what toxic maximalism, toxic masculinity, right? This idea that standing up for your principles and your beliefs and being aggressive and outspoken about it is somehow toxic or destructive. And, I listened to, I think you spoke in 2021 at the Bitcoin conference about that. And, I wanted to touch on that thread. And when I said, how did you get here? Like at the very start of the conversation, how did you get here to where you are with Bitcoin? I didn't want to lead the question, to say, like, because I think this toxic maximalism thing is really, really important. in part just to take away this term toxic, because why is it that it's called toxic to defend forcefully your beliefs and values? Right? Let's go into that, because I think that's the state, that's the place where men have to root themselves and be like, okay, call me whatever you want. I'm going to defend with my dying breath and every key on my keyboard and every bullet in this magazine, my right to live the way that I feel free. And you don't like that. Sorry about your feelings, but I'm going to do it anyway. So I really wanted to get to the subject, 'cause I think it's so important.
It really is. I think that was one of the other things that really drew me into Bitcoin. And I kind of found that subset of Bitcoiners relatively early on in my journey. Because I guess once again, I was one of the few things that I found before Bitcoin, and this was through doing a bunch of Tony Robbins work. And he was one of the first people who introduced me to the concept of polarity, and he is a fucking masculine presence, man. Like, if masculinity is kind of like presence and frame, like, that motherfucker is walking presence and frame. Like, and when I was younger, he was probably the most influential male presence, I guess, in my life. And even though, I mean, I met him a couple of times personally, but even though it was kind of like it wasn't a totally personal thing, like, going to the conferences of his really left an impact on me of like how a man presents himself and holds frame. Like, and I saw him fucking tear apart like men, women, and children on stage, like, like women like acting like victims and stuff. Like, he doesn't give them a fucking inch, doesn't give them a millimeter. He fucking tears them apart, and not from a place of like, I'm, like, not from a place of you're a piece of shit, but from a place of like, this is the truth, and I will fucking stand this ground, and there is no amount of feminine grace that you can use to move this mountain. The mountain is the fucking mountain. And that kind of stuff left an impact on me. And I think it taught me in many ways to stand my ground. Like, when I found something of truth, I was like, well, fuck you. Like, I don't care. This is true. Like, I know for a fact 2 + 2 = 2, and there's nothing you can tell me to change my fucking mind. Like, this is the truth. And that, I think, played a real role when I was first entering the Bitcoin space. Like, and it's funny, if you look at my writing back in the early days, it's kind of, I call it the nice Svetski period. Like, I was, writing about like Bitcoin's, I think one of my early pieces was like, Bitcoin, money, Homo sapiens, and evolution, or some shit like that, right? And I was like talking about how like money evolved and how humans evolved and all this sort of stuff. And like, maybe there was a couple of F-bombs in there, like just me being like, my language is a little bit flary, but
I like it,
to say the least. Yeah.
Speak clearly.
The language was very, I don't know, like nice, I guess. Like, I can't think of another thing to say, but I still like called out stupidities. So it's always been in me. And what happened was I found this guy that I connected with, whose name was Rory, and he was in like the toxic Bitcoin maximalist groups. Like, there was a Telegram group, and he and I connected. We were like two of the only guys who were talking about Bitcoin in Australia at the time, that while everybody else was going through shitcoins, like it was the 2016, 2017 shitcoin phase, and everyone was making money, and the only two guys who seemed to be very vocal on Twitter, and both were in Australia. So we kind of connected, and he kind of brought me into the group. And I found this whole kind of so-called Bitcoin toxic Bitcoiners group. And I don't know, man, I feel like I got lucky coming into that group early on, because I found a bunch of people. Now, look, mind you, there's always, some dickhead, in everything, like, they kind of take it too far or whatever. But even in the ones that take it too far, there's like a good kernel of truth of like, hey man, he's actually calling out someone, or whatever the case is. Like, there's a lot of noise, but there's still some signal in the noise. And I just found these people who were willing to, I don't know, live and die by the intellectual sword, to put it one way, and they would just go out there and say it as it is and not back down. And yeah, man, it's become like an immune system for Bitcoin. And people have come out and said, "Oh, the immune system is kind of eating itself." And it's like, no, fuck you. No, it's not. The immune system is still doing its job. It's still pushing scammers out. It's still making, grifters' lives hard. Like, it's doing all the things that it needs to do. And yep, sometimes it might overreach with some things, but by and large, it's 95% positive and 5%, childish. But you can't have the 95% positive without the 5% childish, because there's no such thing as perfection. It's always going to overreach, and it's always going to sort of play on that line. So, yeah, man, I think one thing Bitcoiners seem to have done well, and this is where I think a lot of us have come onto then really leaned into the masculine fray, is this idea of, we got labeled toxic Bitcoiners by all the shitcoiners, because we kept calling them out. And toxic Bitcoiners, toxic masculine.
Yep.
Hey, here we are.
What I told Laser, I said, I'm a toxically masculine, toxic maximalist. Try and say that 5 times fast, right? But the things go together, because when you really, I guess, grok, to use that phrase from Stranger in Strange Land, when you really get it on this deep embodied level and you understand the way that all the pieces fit together, you understand that no one's going to hand it to you. Like, the empire is not going to be like, here you go, enjoy that, right? You're going to have to fight for, all of us are going to have to fight for, well, first of all, we have to fight for our masculinity, because the entire gravity of our civilization, media, culture, electromagnetic waves, food, name it, right? It's all draining us of testosterone. It's all draining us of morality. It's all draining us of the ability to be outspoken, social media, all of it, right? So you have to fight for every last bit of masculinity that you can, right? And when people push back on that, and you push back on them, then they go, whoa, right? It's like, don't be so toxic. It's like, first of all, I reject that label, right? I'm fighting for who I am. I'm fighting for what I believe in. And that will just show up at increasingly large levels of, we might say, the fractal, right? For within yourself, like you have to push back within yourself on the feminizing influence in your own mind and heart and decisions. And then as you expand outward, you'll experience it in your inner circles, right? And then you'll experience it, say, at work, and then you'll experience it in, on social media, and then you'll experience it at the level of society and culture. And you have to fight for these things, and you have to be prepared to fight for these things against overwhelming resistance. But if you're not prepared to fight for these things, and they're not prepared, to go up against that overwhelming resistance, something somewhere will take you down. And that doesn't mean that you have to do it perfectly either. And that's the part that I'm really glad that you hit on. Yeah, sure. So 5% of the time you're really childish and not skillful at it, right? But that doesn't invalidate the rest of the effort. And that's the part that I think that is really difficult. It's like, look, you screwed up here. It's like, yeah, but I'm fighting the good fight. What are you up to?
Yeah, what are you doing? Exactly. I think the word fighting, I think, to me is really important. Is that I used to have this, my old Facebook, Jesus, like 10 years ago, was this funny meme. It was the Spartacus show, and it says, violence doesn't solve everything, but it's a good fucking start. So it's kind of like this, and it's got like this guy like chopping someone's head off or something,
right?
And it's I think, again, it's a joke, it's a meme, but there's some truth in it, in the sense that fighting in itself is, there's something masculine about fighting. There's, like, testosterone, for example, is an as-needed hormone. The reason it's dropped to a degree, not to a degree, but to a large degree in modern society, is that we're no longer, like, testosterone naturally increases when you have resistance, and when you have, and the closer that resistance is to the threat of death or damage, the more testosterone boosts. And you look at, go to a prison and see those people. None of them are on testosterone injections.
Probably
People
not.
are fucking jacked as fuck.
Yeah.
Because they are in a position of, they're at the border between, life and death on a consistent basis. And what did we as human beings, and, we were exposed to the elements, we were exposed to, danger, warfare, all sorts of stuff on a consistent basis all throughout history. And in order to survive, we formed these, hierarchies that revolved around the patriarchy, revolved around the father being responsible for the safety of everyone. So he was always in a position of risk. So when you're in that position, your testosterone naturally has to be higher. And I think it's not just fighting, but also the threat of fighting or the threat of danger naturally spikes it. It's an as needed. Like if you're working in a fucking office or in a closet, you don't need much testosterone. Right?
Come out of the closet. Come out of the closet.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to come out.
We'll explain that to the viewers in a minute.
So I think the manifestation of that, like the ability to say no and fuck you and that's wrong and do all of that sort of stuff is as masculine as it gets, because the masculine forges itself like iron sharpens iron, and that's how the masculine responds. It responds to competition, it responds to risk, it responds to resistance. The feminine doesn't. The feminine flows. Like when you push it, like it goes with the push. But you push me, I'm gonna fucking push you back. And that is not toxic. That is completely 100,000,000% natural.
Yeah.
And this is. I remember watching this video a while ago, which was fucking terrifying. Was like not even just terrifying, but fucking disgusting and stupid and moronic and idiotic and every other derogatory term I could give it. But it was a leaked video of, I think it was like a CIA briefing or whatever, and they were talking about they had this scientist in there talking about this new drug that they fixed up that you give it to someone and it can biologically lower their aggression and their propensity towards violence. Now, when I saw that, I was like, holy fucking shit. Like, what are these fucking maniacs thinking? Because, yes, it might sound all nice to, think that you can just remove the violence piece, because, hey, violence is bad, so we must remove the violence piece. But what you do is you actually, in doing so, you'll remove the signal, for example, for testosterone. You'll remove the signal for the man to become the protector, the provider, the leader. You'll remove the competitive edge of an individual. You basically will turn the male into a eunuch, like a castrated, fucking useless turd that exists to maybe put some half-functional sperm into a sperm bank for some woman to hopefully impregnate herself. Like it basically destroys everything, and that kind of thinking. This is why I'm no longer supportive of scientists and all this sort of stuff, because I think they're all fucking out of their minds. Like they all want to clinically fix everything by fucking around with natural human predispositions and hormones and chemistry and all this sort of stuff, thinking that they're going to engineer us into more peaceful, better beings, when in reality, like, this ability to fight, this ability to compete, this ability to resist, these are all absolutely key characteristics of the masculine male hero archetype. Like all of those things, like that's what it is. And you can't just remove violence without removing all of the good that characteristic entails. So anyway, I just thought of that as I was speaking.
No, I agree with you, and that's been the entire thrust of civilization, at least in America and the West, probably since like the 1960s, really overtly. Because I wish I could remember the name of the book. It'll be in the show notes if I can remember what it is. But there was an author who he wrote about the era of the 1960s, and he said that what happened there, which is of course a time before any of our memory, was that the rebels, this is the way the author framed it, I may not agree with this totally, but we'll take something from his argument. The rebels of culture said, look at the horrors of World War II, look at Europe, look at the atomic bomb, look at the environmental devastation, look at slavery, look at the Great Depression, look at all of this stuff. The people who have been running civilization, the white men, essentially is what they said, the patriarchy, whatever frame, they have failed, and it's time for new leaders. And this is in his argument, the elite said, you know what, you're right. We quit. You get it. Right? And so they handed over the keys. Right? That's the argument that the book made. So the elites handed over the keys to these rebels, who then immediately set about taking away everything that had made that world, namely male aggression. Right? That's, he said, look at this horrible devastation. We need to frame everything in terms of Mother Earth and coming together and all these hippie 1960s kind of values. Look at war and devastation, and you see this and even in the Matrix with Agent Smith, like humans are a cancer on the planet. They're consumptive, and then you see these. This is at the end of the movie The Abyss. Right, the movie The Abyss, the director's cut version, which was a James Cameron movie about they discover these aliens at the bottom of the ocean, and they're like, why shouldn't we destroy humanity? Look at war and all these terrible things. And then The Fifth Element, as Lilu, this alien from another planet or whatever, is looking at the history, and she comes across war, and she gets all disillusioned, and love is the solution. You see this propaganda show up over and over again to remove male aggression from society because it's ultimately destructive. And that's been the whole thing. And so as men, we wake up now in the first part of the 21st century, and we wonder, who are we? We spend our lives getting run over, taken advantage of, being weak, whatever term you want to give, passive, nice guys, right? And discover it's not actually getting us anywhere, and it's driving our civilization off a cliff. And then we wake up to that and recognize that the thing that I've been told to never use, this sword and the stone, is what I actually need to live my life. And so many men are terrified. I deal with this in my coaching practice. So many men are terrified because they wonder, if I pull the sword from the stone, who will I become? Will I become the tyrant I've always been told I will be? And I say no, because you worry about becoming that is why you will not be. That you'll pull the sword from the stone and you'll become the righteous man that you always want to be. But you have to learn to harness your aggression wisely in the face of an entire culture that says aggression is the worst part of men. Aggression is one of the best parts of men. It's not the only part of men, but it's one of the best parts of men when properly harnessed. And so we experience the opposite of that almost every day.
Totally, man. You brought some chills down my spine listening to that. Like, I think aggression really is like, without it, and I think this is in part, like, as much as I call my dad like an example of what not to be in life, like he was definitely an aggressive, like that was his, part of his masculine position, whereas, he was wrong in many other ways, but he was a good example for me to see, that kind of ability to sort of, unleash something that, when the time came to like protect or provide or something like that. There was this one time when we were at this train station, me and my brother were in the back of the car, and some junkie off the street like poked his head into the car. My dad like was across the road like saying bye to someone at the train, and he fucking ran down, chased this guy down the street, went to fucking beat him up. And it was like, for me as kids, like, it was embarrassing, but seeing that, like, there was a level of subconscious knowing that someone was there, like, protecting us. But that's gone today. Like, most of these feminized men. I was at the markets in California the other day, and there was this woman, like, you could just see it in the body language, man. It was so disgusting. Like, she's got the baby with her, and she's walking ahead, and she's got a shirt that says "Save Trans Kids." I was looking at that, but then you look 6 or 7 steps behind her is this emasculated subhuman of a male, like, walking with her. I can't even call him a man because it's not what he was. He was a male. That's it. Just a member of the male, like, castrated member of the male species, just walking there, and you could just see the the lifelessness in him, just walking behind this, like, woman who was taking the lead. And, like, I was like, imagine living a life like that. Like, I bet, like, she's the breadwinner most probably. Yeah. Like, he'd be at home probably looking after, like, complete role inversion. And there's tyranny. If you ever wanted a portrait of tyranny, that's tyranny right there. And what the strength of a man stems from, as you said, when he gave the definition of meek. It's, those who have swords, who know how to use them, but choose to keep them sheathed.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the best men, and again, this is a Jordan Peter-esque thing, right? Is the best men are monsters. Those who know they can do damage, but have the ability to restrain themselves. And restraint is another masculine thing.
Mm-hmm.
That's the masculine virtue. Restraint is not a feminine virtue. Unrestraint is actually a feminine virtue, and that's one of the things that makes them so beautiful, is because they can be completely unhinged, they can open up, they can be free, they can flow, but in that chaos, the masculine can remain centered, stable, restrained, and can be a wall in amongst that chaos. And that's what draws that's what creates that polarity between us. And we live in a world today of complete unrestraint. Like, restraint is out the window, responsibility out the window, aggression out the window. Like, all of these virtues and characteristics are being thrown out, and we're living in complete relativism, and no one knows, like, as we sort of said earlier, everything matters, so nothing matters, and everything's meaningless, and everyone's walking around nihilistic and apathetic, and they don't know why. They think it's an absence of Prozac.
Right.
So let's take some more Prozac to fix the situation.
Yeah, more external medications, right? More things that you consume. If I consumed something, it'll make it better. It's not that I need to reform anything inside myself. So this is so I'm glad we got to cover all this, because to me these are some of the underlying foundational themes that are behind the UnCommunist Manifesto. That, first of all, it's a manifesto, right? Like, there's a distinctive meaning about that word. It's a call to action. It's a call to arms, right? Mm-hmm. And it's a call to arms for what? Uncommunism, right? And I love, and it's sort of like this very short, to the point, not too short, but like brief, to the point statement of values against the communist values that are being forced onto us. And so I definitely wanted to get into that, because I learned a ton from the book. It gave me a whole bunch of new directions to think in and understand Bitcoin about, and masculinity as well. So let's start talking about the UnCommunist Manifesto.
Let's do it. I think maybe I'll quickly say where the name came from. It's we didn't know what the hell to call the Blade book. We were thinking the Individualist Manifesto, the Sovereign Manifesto, the Capitalist Manifesto, the Naturalist Manifesto. Figure out a freaking name for the damn thing. And yeah, we were out at dinner, and it was actually Mark's wife. It was just like one of those random ideas. We're sitting there, we're eating dinner. She's like, "What about the UnCommunist Manifesto?" And we just kind of like looked at each other. We're like, "That's actually pretty fucking good."
Yeah.
And anyway, we rolled with that, and it's amazing. Like, I've never been through the book writing process. Like, I've written, I think I did some math the other week, and I was like, I think I've written over 1 million words. Like, when it comes to all the articles, may even be trending towards 2 million now. But sitting down and writing a book, and then having to like edit it and format it and distill it and turn it into something coherent and punchy was an interesting journey, to say the least.
Mm-hmm. And so let's talk about the structure of the book, like, because it follows a very well-defined path. Like, you lay out the foundational notions of your argument, especially the whole section at the beginning of the definitions, by the way. That was great. That was so great, because it established this common language for me as a reader, for you and Mark as authors, like, to get me understanding your frame and then operating within it for the remainder of the arguments that you made. So let's go through the sections of the book.
Totally. So the definitions part, this is funny. As I was writing, I was coming up, like, I was using these words, and I was thinking in my head, I was like, fuck, we want to present an argument here, and it needs to be coherent. And as you said, like, in the past, when I've done either debates or whatever with someone, I've always tried to create a common ground and say, look, these are the words we're using, and this is what they mean. Mm-hmm. And if we're going to agree on that, then we can actually have a productive conversation. And yeah, like, I pushed for having the definitions included. Mark was like, "Oh yeah, but we're gonna, the book's gonna get a little bit long," and it's, I was like, "Nah, fuck that. We have to have the definitions in there, because if we lay that out at the beginning, at least those who read them, because I know some people probably skip the definitions and just go straight to the book, but those who read those definitions, they're kind of primed, and they're like, okay, so that's what he means. That's what he means. That's what he means." And then yeah, like, when we to sort of give some more context, we sat down, and when the first bit of writing that I actually did was I took elements from the original Communist Manifesto and I just rebutted them. And we were going to write the book like that for a time being, like we we're just going to rebut certain segments. But kind of looked at it like, doing like a book of rebuttals doesn't, it's not as standalone. Like it doesn't have its own spirit. It's kind of like just a response to something. And it's just weird how it just came from the void of both our subconscious. Like we just sat down and just started like writing, and all of a sudden it started to form itself into this thing with its own points. And I mean, yeah, if we can start at chapter 1 if you like.
Let's do it.
And kind of go through some of those.
Yeah, can we start with a couple of the best definitions that I liked? Because
yeah, sure.
I'm so grateful that you guys took the risk of putting that in, because yes, I can understand from an author's perspective, like, oh, someone might just skip over all the definitions, or it creates all this lag time before I actually start making my arguments. But the definitions that as I read them, they were foundational to the arguments, and they were actually making the arguments already. Like I could see the argument through the lens of the definition. So the two that I want to start with are money and capitalism, because I thought those were my two favorite definitions that you started with. And I was like, oh, here we go. This is going to happen now.
Yeah, totally. So, yeah, the capitalism one, I think, is one of the strongest, most poignant points in the entire book, is that people keep trying to frame capitalism as some political modality. And the big point that we made was that, no. Capitalism is not it's not politics. It's just a process. It has existed since the beginning of time, since the first time we picked up a stick and threw it at an animal to, to save time and energy in acquiring food. That was capitalism. And then we shared that food with somebody else who made a fire, and that was division of labor, right? So like we've been doing this stuff from the beginning of time. And like, if you think about, human action toward a goal or a pursuit, it is, this constant transformation of, some form of chaos into a higher degree of order, and creating a new chaos for greater order. And we just do that. That is what we do. We're engineers, we're creators, we're builders. This is what humans do. And when you think about capitalism in that sense, and I can substantiate this by saying, like, how does one define capital? Well, physical capital is like time, energy, and scarce resources. And maybe metaphysical capital is like ideas, mathematics, maybe I wouldn't put mathematics in there, like kind of ideas, and maybe reputation is probably another piece of capital that is a little bit more metaphysical. But those things, we take them, we form them into something, and then we produce something else out of it. And that process has always existed, and it exists in every single political modality. I don't care, like, capitalism exists in communism. It's just the black market. Like, people are still trading and doing stuff.
Yeah,
that's what it is. Capitalism exists in socialism. It exists in fascism. It exists in all of these things. Anything where there is some sort of level of productivity, it's there. The question is, how much do we suffocate the natural process through political machinations and, like, basically squeezing the life out of this natural process that humans undertake? And the more we do that, the more we basically kill everything around us. And we've seen it time and time again. When we get in the way of that natural process, we distort things, whether they're small distortions, as we've sort of had in the more quote-unquote liberal West, or whether it's been, real disastrous consequences like the starvation in communism and all that sort of stuff. Where it's crazy. I was reading this Chinese history thing recently, and how they try and, like, whitewash these stuff. Like, maybe whitewash isn't even the right word. They're trying to, like, gloss over, like, the Great Leap Forward. Look, only 50 million people died. Like, it was a small miscalculation.
No big deal.
On the part of the communists. It's all right.
We'll just make more.
Yeah, exactly. It's fine. So it's just anyway. I think that piece I think was just so important because we are all capitalists by the very fact that we're alive, and yeah, when we strip the political notion out of it, I think we can see it for what it is, and then our goal should be to use our time, energy, resources, reputation, ideas more wisely, more effectively, more efficiently. Who in their right mind would be against that?
Right.
Hopefully nobody, but clearly there are a few people against that.
Well, there are a lot of people not in their right mind, right?
Well, that too, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's actually the majority.
Yeah, unfortunately. Well, that's what. Go ahead. Sorry.
So no, I was just going to go to money, but maybe
no, please.
You recap this.
Oh well, I mean, what I really liked about that definition was that it, as it said, you depoliticized it, because capitalism, is one of those loaded words. Love is a loaded word. Like the meaning of the word love changes based on the context. The meaning of the word world changes based on the context. And the meaning of the word capitalism changes based on the context. And it's really annoying. So the definition that you provided really helped me understand the essence of it. Like you really cracked into the heart of what capitalism is in a depoliticized way. It's like, yes, this is evolutionary process of creative destruction, let's say, and evolution towards a greater state of efficiency. Right. Brilliant. Brilliant. And because you can't really argue that that's what it is, because that is what it is, right? Whether it takes away the scorn, the shame of the word, oh, you capitalists.
Totally.
Yeah.
Mark and I went back and forth on this because he's like, oh, we should use the word free markets. And I was like, no, man, fuck them. We're not letting them take this word away.
Yeah.
I was like, they've taken every other word away, but
Yeah.
this is a fundamental thing. Like, capital is, it's our freaking lifeblood. That and to do better and more with our capital is the most righteous and virtuous thing we can do. Like, that's what we're supposed to do.
Yeah.
To squander it is sinful. It's stupid. Like, our capital is precious, and I can't. Like when you depoliticize it, as you said, you look at it and you're like, I want to do better. Like, I want to capitalize.
Yeah. Well said.
Like, that's what I want to do. So, yeah, that was one. And then, the money. Now, I don't have the definition in front of me, but I think it was something to do with, like, language of value, right?
Money is, money is the language of value. Full stop.
Oh, is that all I had?
That's all you had.
There we go.
It's like this. I highlighted that. I read on the Kindle. I highlighted that. You didn't even elaborate. Money is the language of value. Mic drop. Walk out. Right.
There we go. So, I mean, that's that. I think if people can get that through their head, then I think they'll maybe start to go on the path of understanding why Bitcoin is so profound. Is that now we have a language that, at the moment we're all speaking gibberish, basically, in the realm of value, and no one's understanding anything. We don't even understand ourselves in the fiat language of value. Whereas this one, like, and I guess this language transcends the language we're speaking now. Like, we're speaking English now, and we're conveying ideas. But, like, the language of value is kind of even deeper than that, because two people who don't speak a language through which they can share ideas can still express value in some way and trade that. And that, like, it's that classic. Someone made an example of, like, the Afghans when the Americans went there, and it's like they didn't speak their language, they didn't have the same religion, but they sure could use the $1 billion of cash, you know what I mean? So like, so that language of value is there, and even though the US dollar is a shitcoin and all of that, the fact that money sort of transcends that is even in the most deranged, weird settings, it kind of it speaks of its own. So yeah.
And one of the ideas that I wanted to kick around was we're living in an age of language manipulation, right? In this 1984 kind of way, like ignorance is intelligence, or war is peace, that sort of thing. Like, that's going on. Our languages, first of all, our language is being dumbed down. Like, our words are being removed from our vocabulary. One word that I think about a lot that we don't have anymore is shameless. Like we hear the word pride a lot, right? And extreme pride is called hubris. What we don't have is shameless. Shamelessness means like it masquerades as pride. In fact, it's actually like I just can't be shamed. I don't know. It's a form of mental illness to be shameless, right? A shameless self-promoter. No one likes that person, right? No one likes a hubristic person who thinks they can't be defeated either. But so that word has been removed, and so our language is being manipulated. And so if money is the language of value, and money is being manipulated, then our language is being manipulated, and we can't actually communicate anymore.
Totally, yeah. It ties back into like what we said earlier about how individuals orient themselves in the game of civilization, which is, the economic game. Is we make value judgments, we make evaluations, we then take action based on those evaluations, we get feedback, we then reorient based on the feedback, and then we perform new actions. And this kind of step-by-step process is what humans do, implicitly or explicitly, overtly or covertly. We do it subconsciously or consciously. And we're doing that all the time. We're always taking in feedback and we're always doing stuff. Now, if that feedback is, this language of value, and as you said, if it's getting manipulated or distorted, like not only is the initial orientation wrong, but the feedback is wrong. And, then when we're trying to orient ourselves, like we don't really know what we're doing. Like it's just, we're in this realm of noise, 360-degree noise. And some of us seem to still be able to navigate inside that noise and can still, maintain some sort of connection to a moral compass in that noise. But it's fucking difficult, man. Like, and think about like how much of our nervous energy goes into that. It's like, we lose 9/10 of our energy just trying to maintain moral direction. And then we have 10% of our energy left to actually do something with. And we wonder why we're not effective.
Yes.
Like we're using it all up.
Yeah, we're trying to resist the winds and the currents and the tides and everything to steer our ship of our lives forward towards something, just maybe make any amount of material progress to hold on to what we have, let alone be able to grow morally. Like it's incredibly difficult right now.
Totally. So yeah, I think that's just such a. Anyway, thank you for pulling that one out. I actually forgot that I'd just done a single sentence, but yeah.
Oh, it was a brilliant, because it didn't that notion didn't need to be unpacked at all. Like money is a language of value. Boom, it's great. So then on the back of those definitions, let's talk about how the UnCommunist Manifesto kind of unfolds as a statement of, we'll call it a statement of belief, actually, what you believe about the world, and beliefs that you and I share. Like how do you build on top of that to the structure of the book?
So, I guess let me pull up. I just want to pull up the book in front of me because I'm going to pull a couple components out.
Yep.
Might make.
I've got my Kindle right here.
I should have been a little bit more prepared for having this in front of me, but anyway.
Okay. While you're doing that, I will explain to our viewers why Aleks is in a closet, because Aleks is moving house today, and so graciously agreed to come on the podcast with me. So he made a makeshift recording studio in the closet. Which,
man,
mad respect for that, by the way. Like, yes, I'm going to do this conversation if I have to do it in the closet. It's really good, actually. Thank you.
For sure, brother. Anytime.
Yeah. So why you don't have it up, right? Why you don't have the PDF up with you?
Indeed. So okay, I just found it. So yeah, I think the first big thread was and the chapter is entitled "Static versus Dynamic Classes," and I think this is an idea I've toyed with for a while. And it's funny, the older I get, the more conservative I become. And
right.
The more, and I guess that is with everyone. Maybe not everyone, but at least people who
pay attention,
value maturity.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Maturity and conservatism are kind of like intertwined. But people in the past have called me, oh, you're a classicist, and I don't know. At this point, I'm like, okay, maybe I am, because I honestly think that we have to have classes of people, and I don't. this is sort of where the book kind of delineates between static and dynamic classes. Is if you want to build a business and work 120 hours a week, and pursue entrepreneurial excellence and build Amazon for whatever the version we want to pick of a business, and you choose to make that sacrifice, and you choose to take that risk, and you go and build something. And me, I value, I don't know, surfing and hanging out and living a much more easy life. I'm happy with a salary, whatever. I just work 35 hours a week or something. Or even, let's say, in a 50 years from now, where our purchasing power has actually retained some value, we'll be working less and we'll have more time for other pursuits. I like art, reading, philosophy, whatever. So I work 20 hours, you do 120. We 100% should be in different economic classes at the very least. And if we're in different economic classes, there is things that I guess ancillary or peripheral to those, which might be the kind of groups of people we hang around, like the kind of clubs we're in, the kind of people we associate with, and everything. There will be different classes, and I guess in the book we kind of talk a little bit more about economic classes, but I think this idea that people are strated out has always existed and will always exist. And when we try and remove these classes and create some sort of fantasy utopia where we're all the same, is when we destroy civilization.
Agree.
And we've seen it time and time again. Because here's the thing, the only way to equalize everyone is to actually chop everyone down to size. And the problem with that, there's always someone stupider, or there's always someone more incompetent, or there's always someone more lazy, or there's always someone more immoral, or whatever the case is. So you have to keep chopping down till you get to the lowest common denominator, and you basically have a civilization full of morons. And that is maybe nice for central planners, because then it's easy to plug a few no longer variables, it's easy to plug some constants into a spreadsheet and come out with a functional model. But it's very hard to put a bunch of variables that are infinitely variable into a spreadsheet of infinite variability and try and have a functional model. It doesn't work. So this equalization sits in stark contrast to this idea of diverse inequality. I think it's another concept that I talk about in chapter 1 is dynamic inequality, is that you can't have equality. In fact, equality is inverse to fairness. And what a lot of people say unknowingly when they say we need equality is like, no, you're actually advocating for fairness, because if I want to be fair, the outcome is going to be unequal. But if I'm equal, the process of getting to being equal is like unfair. I have to take from someone and give to someone else and try and equal everything out. So anyway, so dynamic inequality and this sort of static and dynamic classes are sort of intertwined ideas, and they sort of both dovetail into each other through this concept of merit. And this is sort of what we discuss in that is, even the feudal system, like, it emerged from previous, like, the knighthood and the warrior class and the people who actually went out and fought and became property owners and stuff like that. And even that was far more functional. Like, France, the greatest, like, richest kingdom on earth by the 1700s, emerged through a functional hierarchy of classes. Now, there may not have been great mobility in those classes, and that's what I think we can do better. But there was still some sort of functional hierarchy. When the commies came in, they just obliterated all the classes, they destroyed the patriarchy, they equalized everyone, and what did we get? We had a power vacuum, and we brought extreme levels of tyranny and unsophisticated non-noble tyranny into it,
Right.
right? Like at least any tyranny by kings and nobles was like kind of like, whip a few people and like yes, there was some guillotines and this and that, but it wasn't like the level of atrocity
Yes.
that you had with these completely like secular communist collectivist kind of things that came afterwards. There was no nobility in any of that. Like once we wiped out all the fucking nobility from civilization. But anyway, coming back to classes, so all the kind of class systems that have existed before, they've all suffered from stultification or being relatively static. And maybe we as a civilization just had to go through this period of the last 200 years where we had to, introduce dynamism back in. We've done a lot of damage in the process of doing that, and maybe there was a better way to do that. But, here we are now at the verge of a new age where we can reinstitute classes based off merit, and input and value. And I think that's just such an important idea, is that like even if you were, for example, born to a wealthy family and you inherited, let's say, a ridiculous amount of wealth, well, you can't keep your position at the expense of someone else now by printing or taxing or borrowing and doing all that sort of stuff. Like the game changes, and the ability to fall creates a kind of like, if I could jump off a cliff and instead of me dying, you died, I'd just keep jumping off the cliff, right?
It's fun.
But yeah, I'd skydive and then someone else dies on my behalf. Like, what a great life. And, I'd probably keep doing that. But unfortunately, like, that's not how reality works. And, when you kind of make economic reality map real reality, then all of a sudden, like, you can fall in, your class position. But also, if you were just unfortunate enough to be born to a poor family or whatever, you can actually climb. And you sort of have this dynamic nature in these classes. So anyway, I think I've rambled on about that, but I don't know if there's any points or threads you want to pull on there.
I mean, that's the thing that I think people don't understand about our world that makes our current civilization or has made it so powerful, is that in the feudal era, there were classes were functional, to more or less produced great wealth, but the classes were fixed. It was very rare that a peasant, or a laborer could become a knight. I don't even know that you could, or that a knight could become a king. Everyone would just kind of stick, was kind of stuck, right? But what made American society different for a while was that class mobility was actually quite high. Like I remember maybe it was a couple of years ago, they were talking about, the billionaire class or whatever. Like that's the soundbite. But what they don't talk about is that the billionaire class is not the same group of people year over year, or like the elite or the 1%. People fall out, right? And people climb up. It's this giant churn. But then communism has this idea that like, oh, there's only ever two classes of people. That's it, right? There's no shades of gray. There's the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, and they're forever going to be in conflict until the proletariat, this uniclass, takes over everything from the bourgeoisie, and then we're all flat, right? It's like it can't tolerate the ambiguity almost, right? And it even reduces familiar relations to money and the whole thing in the quest to simplify things so that they're easy enough for us to understand and control, right? Rather than allowing people to have responsibility and take risks and rise and fall in ways that aren't necessarily equal, but they are fair, right? This gets back to the whole masculinity, femininity, and stuff like that. But that's kind of the pieces that I took from that section of the book.
Totally. There's one other piece I think is important, which is kind of and you just touched on it there. It's all these collectivist ideologies really try and reduce all the problems of the world into like one easy to understand problem, right?
Yes.
It's the bourgeoisie versus the thing. It's like, okay. And now There is power in simplicity, and I guess this is probably where the communists got a lot of traction with their ideology. It's like, find something clear to blame and just blame that. The problem is their axis was a disaster, because by creating such a simple problem and a vague classification for the problem with a complete lack of definition, like what is the bourgeoisie? I don't know. Am I a bourgeoisie because I was born to a shop owner? Like, so should I then be killed? Like, what the fuck is going on here? So, like, where that line is, because that's vague, and there was no definitions around who the problem was. And this is, once again, during the original French Revolution, like during the Terror, actually, they instituted laws. What was it like? Basically, anyone who had like any affiliation, and they didn't, define what affiliation meant with, like, royalists or the federalists who were pushing back against the Jacobins and the left, was basically taken and got their heads chopped off. And the whole moral of the story of that period of France was that because everything was so vague, they ended up all chopping each other's heads off. So like Robespierre, who was like the person who was like the revolutionary, ended up like he basically betrayed his right hand man. And there's a funny thing. His right hand man, I can't remember his name. Was it Dante or something like that? He, on the way to getting his head chopped at the guillotine, he said, "I only regret two things. One is that I'm still, in my prime, like I'm good looking, basically, because he was a bit of a womanizer. But he said, number two is that I'm going to the guillotine 6 weeks before Robespierre, like, who sentenced him at the time. And the only thing he was wrong about was he was wrong by a couple of weeks, because Robespierre ended up in the guillotine like 3 weeks later. But this is the thing, when you create like vagaries around this stuff, which ties back to why we had definitions in the beginning. But anyway, where I'm getting to is like the other point that I think was poignant in this, which many Austrian economists have talked about, is that the real struggle has never been, one class against another, because struggle is complex. Like, we're always struggling against something and someone, and like we're struggling against ourselves most of the time, really. Like, we struggle to become better versions of ourselves. And when I look back at how ridiculous I was in my 20s, like there was a struggle to emerge from that. So struggle is not necessarily the bad thing. The real problem, and this is probably the real axis of the struggle that people need to understand, is between the choice to coerce or to cooperate with another. And this comes back to your point in the beginning about interdependence. Is that a mature, responsible adult understands that civilization is interdependent, understands that they can't do everything, understands, and respects private property, and has the ability to interact with others, and chooses to cooperate, because that is the responsible thing to do, as opposed to coerce and take in order to get ahead. And this is sort of like, morality is intertwined in this, responsibility is intertwined in this, restraint is intertwined in this, but this is what it takes to build a mature individual, and then therefore a mature civilization or society. And all of these alternative ideologies, particularly on the left, are all about some form of coercion in order to get the means always justify the ends, and the end is some fantastical idea of like some static equality. So any means count, because everything on the planet is unequal, so we'll just level everything. And as soon as something sprouts a little bit, we'll go back and level it, and it basically cannibalizes itself in the process of doing so. So anyway, that kind of distinction between coercion and cooperation is really important. I think that is the struggle that people need to contend with, and one is unhinged irresponsibility, coercion, and the other one is restraint and responsibility and frame, and that is cooperation, and that's where the struggle is. So anyway. I just wanted to finish on
Yeah, I
that.
mean, we pull the threads all out of there, right? Like this is masculinity. This is the essence of it, right? You like that, right? You
100%.
pull, you cooperation versus coercion, right? Which one of these, which one does the masculine man choose, right? Does the competent masculine man choose, right? Are you going to coerce someone to behave, or are you going to find a way? Are you going to find a way to now? There's a degree to which you can bash ideas into each other, right? There's a degree to which that competition, right? Competition, coercion, all these things fit. Competence, all these things, they all fit together, and this is why Bitcoin threads right through the middle of all of it, because it enables
Hmm.
this on the level of the individual man to assert his independence, his sovereignty against the state, against coercion, against economic and financial coercion, to begin to say, you know what, this is how I'm going to do this thing, and I will no longer allow myself to be coerced, right, in this economic way.
Draw strong, clear lines. I think that's one of my favorite thing about Bitcoin, and kind of, around this sort of ideology of responsibility. Once again, it's like it's about drawing clear lines.
Hmm.
This is where I stand, and that once again links back into the masculinity, into frame. Frame. The very
Mm.
word means like drawing some clear lines. Like this is my position. So yeah, I think that you mentioned the word competent, which is kind of like what we call the second chapter, and I guess I don't know. Was there a particular point you wanted to pull from this second chapter?
I mean, the overall case that I see you building at this stage in the book is this idea of, that cooperation versus coercion is contingent on the notion of a man being competent. If a man is
Hmm.
incompetent,
Hmm.
then on some level he must be coerced. I mean, maybe that's too hard of a word, right? But if a man is competent, he feels completely capable of cooperating. Like, let's put it that way.
Hmm. Hmm. Totally, totally. And it was in this chapter where we wanted to kind of also delve into, like, what does a competent individual, like, how do they behave and what do they do? And there was some parts like where we talked about like family and relationship and sacred union, which once again, Marxists and communists and all of this, they want to abolish all of uh, these kind of like sacred institutions or sacred hierarchies in order to overturn everything. And I mean, the patriarchy and particularly the family was something. And I guess this is a classic projection on behalf of Marx and Engels and all of these people. Who Marx was a pathetic father.
Mm.
He was an absent father.
Yeah.
A couple of his kids died. He couldn't provide. So he projected his own bitterness and hatred and resentment onto other people who were clearly doing better
Hmm.
because they provided, they created, they gave something to their offspring, and he didn't, and he couldn't,
Mm.
and instead of doing something about it, he just bitched about it and basically created. I mean, did you read the Communist Manifesto?
No, I haven't. I probably should.
Oh man, it's just
I've read his poetry.
it's like a
It's not very good.
oh yeah, it's like brain cancer in a book,
Oh
basically.
dear.
Like it's so bad. Like and
One
he
star
goes
on
in and he
Amazon.
just that's it. Like it's -5 if I could give it that. Like it's just so bad. Like not only this just like rambles on and contradicts himself throughout the book 100 times, but he goes on about like there's sections in there where he says that the bourgeoisie views family, and I'm going to paraphrase. He views family purely as a mechanism for cash transactions, or
Yeah.
like basically they're purely commercial. So he negates this idea of like love, and we tried to really, I think in this chapter we talked about love and labor. Is that
Yeah.
it's really important to be able to like he tries to frame first of all the cash transaction as bad, so he makes that presupposition, and then he says that and because the bourgeoisie operates purely in the realm of the cash transaction, their family and their relationships are just transactional, and that's it. So everything is empty, and we kind of like push back on that on two dimensions. Dimension number one is that, hold on, idiot, the cash transaction is very important because you must be able to measure, the quantum of value you've created through your labor in some way, shape, or form in order to transact it and trade it with somebody else. So you have that ability to transact, cash payments, as he calls them, for labor is extraordinarily important. But number two, there's a thing called love, which you may not have ever had experience with. I'm sorry, Marx. But, the thing is, I mean, just about everyone I know, yes, there is maybe a few really shitty parents who have given zero love to their kids. But I mean, if their kids survived past, 3 years old, there was some love there in the beginning. So I think this is almost a moot point. But no parent is, giving an invoice to a 1-year-old infant for the milk coming out of their teeth. That's not how it works. So love existed from that point.
Keeping a bill.
And yeah, keeping this tally. He may have, but, maybe that's why he was resentful towards his kids. But, these weird projections go on in this second chapter, and it's just weird reading, the Communist Manifesto and seeing the kind of crap he says. He talks about these bourgeoisie people, and first of all, he doesn't interact with them. Second of all, he hates them.
Yeah.
And third, he apparently knows how their relationships are structured, which is madness. So we kind of say, look, most of these family and familial relationships, they revolve around love first and labor second. And you don't want to extend love beyond a certain boundary. And this is, again, a big leftist misnomer today, is that, we should love everybody and respect them all equally. It's like, no, you actually should fucking not, unless you want to cheapen love and respect.
Amen.
If you loved and respected everybody equally, then you don't love and respect anyone. That shit should be as selective as it fucking gets. And, we have that, the institution of family is where you reserve the greatest amount of love, and you use it there, and its heaviest impact is there. And then with others, you don't transact through mere love. You transact by measuring your relative value of the labor and the input and what you've produced. And that's a functional society. You don't just remove both of those and make everything communal. It just doesn't work. And I think this is where the failings of communists and Marxists alike is, they have no notion of human psychology. They're mathematically completely inept. They're conceited. They live in a constant state of projecting crap on others. It's so weird, man. There's so many contradictions. So yeah, that's what we really tried to do, I think, with this chapter. And then we have our little 10 commandments in there, which are basically a flip on. He's got 10 commandments in his second thing, which are ridiculous. A lot of people don't know that a whole series of them, he's got in there, he was one of the first ones who came up with an idea of I don't think he was the first. It must have been, again, bloody stupid French who came up with progressive taxation. Which to me is one of the dumbest ideas ever. It's the more someone works and produces, the more you take from them. It's if you ever wanted to disincentivize more productivity, you do a progressive tax rate. If anything, if I was ever going to run a country and I was going to introduce taxation, the heaviest taxation would be on the lowest income earners. And that would be an incentive to earn more. That's what you want if you're going to fucking be taxing anyone. But anyway, taxation of all kind is theft. So,
yes.
So let's just make that clear here. But that was, I think, his point number 1 or 2 or whatever. The creation of mass public education is a communist ideology. The centralization of all banking is also a communist concept, and it's in his 10 commandments in the Communist Manifesto. How many of these are familiar in America? All 3 so far. The nationalization of transport and he obviously didn't have airwaves and radio waves back then, but basically what ended up happening in all of the modern states. It's like all of that stuff is all nationalized first, and then it's sold off and rented out to private enterprise. So it's like a number of the free West that we think we live in today. Half of it is built off straight up textbook Communist Manifesto ideology.
Yep.
And we did our 10 points in there, which I encourage people to read when they get the book, like that we push back on that.
Yes, and this continues to build into the next chapter, which I really liked. And I don't want to spoil it for people, but I did want to give the listeners a good sense of like what it is that you're trying to do in this book. And what I think you're successful at doing is, stating a statement of beliefs that I think a lot of men, myself included, can get behind of a statement to make first of all, against the communism that surrounds us and that we're living within increasingly, but also a statement of beliefs about how we should be living. So a negative affirmation that not this, and a positive affirmation this. So I don't want to spoil the whole book for people, but I think that there's so many good ideas in what you have, especially in the next chapter, which is Capitalism's Phantom Variations, where you lay out, what we've been told what we have versus what we actually have. So maybe we'll go over that, and then we'll sort of hint a little bit of what's at the last chapter, the individual in relation to the state, and then we'll kind of leave it there and let people go on the adventure of the UnCommunist Manifesto for themselves.
Totally. So, yeah, I think as you sort of said at the outset, the word capitalism has been co-opted and dirtied, and it's so loaded now that people confuse it with all sorts of things. And I think we did a good job in the beginning with depoliticizing the word itself, number one, and kind of trying to remove the stigma there. But what we also did, and this is the name of the chapter, is as you said, the phantom variations of capitalism, is that we looked at all these other things that people try and frame as capitalism. The big one today is cronyism, and a lot of things come under that, like oligopolies and monopolies and technocracies and all this sort of stuff kind of sits under cronyism, and that's basically it. Yes, it has elements of the capitalist process. Like it's basically a less suffocated version of natural existence, right? Mm-hmm. But it is very good at finding the particular levers to pull so that you can cheat in the game and amass disproportionate capital and wealth by cheating. That's effectively what cronyism is. And while you're playing the game of cronyism, particularly in the early days, man, it's like the winning strategy. Yeah. Like you make a bucket load of money and you amass a bucket load of power. But the problem is that it decays the civilization itself. So at some point, it's time to pay the piper, and I think that's where sort of we are. Somewhere between now and the next 10, maybe 20 years at the outside. We're at kind of the end of the tether of cronyism, and America's kind of the focal point of all of that. Is that it was this, for a period, America was much more closer to kind of like organic capitalism. Like there was no federal government, like there was these frontiersmen building and creating and, respecting private property and all this sort of stuff. Like there was that there, and America was incredibly successful. And this cronyism has just sort of seeped in. And, we've got to a point where we live in a complete cronyist establishment. But, there was that. We talked about, what was another one? Colonialism. And this one, straight up, capitalism is fundamentally built on a respect for private property. Tell me which part of colonialism is a respect for private property? None of it. So it's like it's incompatible. So don't, when people come out and tell me, it's like, oh, you colonialist, blah, blah, blah. It's like, well, no, it's incompatible. Now, mind you, there was obviously some positive things in colonialism, so I don't want to sound like a complete muppet when I bash colonialism. Like there was a lot wrong, but you know what? There was a lot also right. Like there was ideas spread during that period, commerce spread, like civilization spread. Now it wasn't clean, there was a lot of damage done. There was a lot of disrespect of private property and natural resources and things like that. And could it have been done better? Absolutely. But I mean, this is the messy nature of human beings,
history
rising up. This is
yeah.
what we did. And now it's on us. The responsibility is on us to do this better and cleaner and more righteously, to use the word you used before.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the it's a very difficult, and this is why it's sort of to bring it full circle, why I appreciated you telling your story, and because it parallels with mine as well, is sometimes we have to learn what the right thing is by trying a whole lot of wrong things, right? Exactly. And so that's I think, it's exciting to kind of live at this moment because we're given this one last really wrong thing, communism. We're giving this a try, apparently, just to say, like, you know what, maybe we don't need to do that. Maybe there's a better way to go about doing things.
Truly, man. It's the classic saying. It's like, the night is darkest before the dawn, right? So, and this is where, once again, to echo what you said earlier about preparing, like, this is where it's incumbent on the men in the world to really prepare, despite being attacked, despite being called toxic, despite being, positioned as the plague of the earth and aggression is bad, all this sort of stuff. Like, it is incumbent on us to rise above all those labels and to actually prepare now, because the night is going to be darkest before the dawn. And I've said many times that in many ways we're going to be the founding fathers of this new age, and I don't mean new age in some stupid spirituality age. Obviously, I think people get that at this point. But like this new chapter of civilization is that we'll be the founding fathers. Now, we kind of drew the short straw, but also like we're blessed and cursed because we're cursed that we're going to have to endure the clown world, and we're going to have to really see some ugly, stupid, like completely mindless things along the way. But like, I mean, every time, I think the world just can't get dumber than it is right now. I open up Twitter and I'm proven wrong. I'm like, okay, we just got dumb. Like, it's just never fails. So we're going to have to endure that, and I'm sure that there's going to be, as much as I hate to say this, that some of us may end up being casualties or martyrs along the way, because that's the nature of these things. But we will also get to be the ones who set the frame and the stage for the next 5,000, 10,000 years of human civilization. Like, I think that's how important this period, this inflection point is. And I mean, just even saying that brings chills down my spine. It's like, that is a tall order. Like, it is, and it's going to require a level of man to emerge that we haven't seen for hundreds of years, maybe longer. I don't know. At least hundreds of years, maybe thousands of years. And, being able to sort of, some people might listen to this and say, these guys are fucking lunatics. And I'll take that on.
Same.
Fuck. Like, this is how important I think this is. And I, it's humbling, and I'm grateful to know that there are people like you and others on this sort of journey that, we're doing something meaningful. And fuck, man, why else live life if not to live a life of meaning, honestly? Like, so anyway.
Amen. Thank you. Well, that's beautiful and brilliant. I really appreciate you saying that, because I'm very grateful to be on this journey with you as well, and to have covered so much ground and so many different subjects, and so just thank you very much for this. And I know you've had a really long day as well, so thanks for going on with me on this epic marathon of a conversation, and just to the listeners, you paint the picture of the kind of world that you want to live in the back half of the book. So I'll just invite listeners to go and pick up the UnCommunist Manifesto and find out what Alex's vision for the future might be.
Thank you, brother. I really appreciate that.
So where can men go to find out more about you and what you do?
So I have updated my Twitter handle recently. It's called Svetski Writes. So like writing, WRITES. I believe my brain's fried
Yeah.
today. So I'm sure it'll be in the show notes. But yeah, uncommunist.com is the website for the book. We've got like some bonuses and stuff like that that we're giving out for people who pop their email in. Obviously, just want to stay in touch with people and just kind of build this into kind of like a movement of sorts, because we want people to be uncommunist, like simple as that. And I think it's got some memeability, and there's so Twitter, Svetski writes, uncommunist.com, and then I've got a link tree, linktree.com/Svetski is like a whole bunch of links to everything. Depending on when this goes out, the book will go live on Amazon on the 1st of August. And what I encourage people to do is, for the first 36 hours, I think we're going to offer the book up on Kindle really cheap, because what we're looking for is verified reviews on Amazon. If we get somewhere between 50 to 100 of those, I think, in the first week, I guess, this is me thinking about how to hack the algorithm a little bit. But if we land that, if the book lands strongly in the first week, I think we'll hit a bestseller list. And if we do, obviously the book spreads far and wide. And I think just the important thing about this book is that we did a good job capturing the zeitgeist of the time. And I guess this idea of like being resistant to broad compliance and communism and all these cancers that are pervading the world, I think being resistant to that is the actual zeitgeist. It's the true zeitgeist of our age. And I really hope, like, the Communist Manifesto has been one of the most widely read economic and political books in history, apparently. Insane. Like, and, the hope is that this may one day, 50, 100 years from now, also be that, but do it from a place of, hope, prosperity, responsibility, freedom, like liberty, like those kind of ideas, not be a message of fucking entitlement and stupidity and envy, which is effectively what the Communist Manifesto is. It's a short academic justification for mental entropy and behavioral immorality. Like, that's literally all it is. It just makes an academic justification for being the worst version of yourself. Go out, complain, and take shit from other people. There's the Communist Manifesto. Whereas the uncommunist is go out and become a better version of yourself, produce something, and cooperate with others. I think that's a better message.
Completely aligned, and I highly recommend the book to everybody. So thank you so much for all your time today, Aleks, and for all the brilliant insights and thoughts. And I'm just really grateful for this conversation and to be walking this journey forward with you.
100%, man. I'm so glad we bumped into each other, actually, that and the way we did, right?
Oh, that's right.
I was looking for Renaissance of Man as a domain name, and I'm like, fuck, someone took it. And then I found you, and I'm like, oh, who's this guy? And I like looked you up, and then I'm like, I'll follow him on Twitter, and I'm like, oh fuck, he follows me.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, thank you for telling me that story. You hinted at some of that. That's great. It's like, what are the odds we found each other through registered domain names? Yeah, for sure. Perfect.
Classic.
All right. Well, thanks, man. Have a great one.
I will. Thank you, bro.